Welcome back, everybody, to the Coach Robb Podcast Network, episode number 12 of Navigating Amateur Motocross, brought to you by our good friends at HBI Auto. Mr. Derek Harris, Happy New Year. Welcome to another season, buddy.
Hey, good to see you, Coach.
How in the world did we get here? Weren't we just talking about, hey, it's Halloween, hey, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Happy New Year's, and now here we are?
It is actually interesting. It's crazy. We're in the new year. It's the last time that I talked to you. It was a whole different year, so that's kind of a new thing.
It is, I'll tell you what. So I'm want to start out by thanking everybody who has hit up Derek and I with questions, comments, suggestions, both good and bad. We definitely appreciate it. The subscription numbers have been phenomenal. The viewer numbers have gone up quite a bit. Derek, you may or may not realize this, but we also, are on some podcast networks, and the numbers there have been really good as well. Everybody, either logistically or some like to watch and listen. Some can only listen because of their job and when they're listening. So thank you guys for all the support. We are glad that you're gelling with us. Like we said back in our last episode, we do have some guests that we're going to be bringing on. We want to have the guests have some continuity to some of the subjects that we're going to be talking about. So you'll see where those will start to tie in together here as we move forward. But Derek, Happy New Year, man. And I want to keep our conversation going off of our last one, if you're okay with that. I got a lot of feedback from, ironically, moto moms when we started talking about the idea about setting up a bike. And I wanted to start out by picking your brain a little bit on that. I know that we could probably do a 10-hour show on just like, all right, here's a benchmark of where to start. But the big thing, and this was from both moms and dads, was I get to the track. Let's just say ideally the track is wet, perfectly groomed, traction's not an issue. And then as the day goes by, especially being here in Florida, you're in Texas, it doesn't take very long for that sun and the wind to dry that track out and turn it into a bakery. What would you recommend? And again, I know it's no absolute science when we're dealing with this type of setup, but what would you recommend? Where should they start?
Maybe the disparity of conditions begins with riding it. So, we see it all the time at any local level. And of course, maybe not the national level. The kids are more prepared, but number one, show up to your local track and ride all the conditions it has to offer you. So you need to ride there when it's smooth and fast, and then you need to ride there midday, and then you need to ride there late in the day. And if that's not something you can do it all in one day, it's too much riding or too much gap or your time. Then when you pick your practice sessions, you say, okay, I'm going to the track on Sunday. And on this Sunday, I would like to work when it's dry and beat up and whatever. So let me go there late in the day. You obviously know your local tracks, how they prep. Do they water? Do they not?
Yeah.
So that's something that you would want to do. And we see, back when I rode a lot and I, ran my suspension company, and I would show up at our local track at 12 or 1 and go ride late in the day, and it would get rough and beat up. And then of course, that's when I did my testing and did my bike setup. And then I'd show up on race day. And for us, if it was a big race, practice day never replicated how rough race day got because there was more people there. But my bikes work great. And then I'd have people like, oh man, they're bitching and moaning about, their bike setup. Why is yours so good? I'm like, because I ride that, I'm fine with it. And then of course, what I would quote unquote give up in setting for the really smooth track. Well, who cares? It's smooth. It didn't bother me. So I didn't give up anything in reality, but like what they were going for was these bikes that were ultra cushy and ultra comfortable and not a performance setup, but those weaknesses didn't get identified when the track got really rough because they never rode it.
I'm always interested in one of the most recent ones that I've heard was Deegan doesn't chase a lot of setup. They try to get it somewhat in a ballpark, and then he just, like he says, he just has to ride it. I think Hunter was on the same subject of that. Correct me if I'm wrong, and if I am wrong, leave a message in the comments below here. But it's one of the things I don't know. How do you teach that from your perspective, Derek?
I think actually amateurs do this well, although today is worse than ever, which is when I grew up, you might be lucky to get your suspension done. Some kids did, some kids didn't. So you became very comfortable and familiar with your motorcycle because you just rode it a lot. And then I do believe comfortability is more important than setting in general. Nowadays, the bikes are so good off the showroom that if you really go out and we've talked about this before, but you're the correct weight-ish for your bike, odds are the bike is more capable than you are. If you are thinking to yourself that, oh, if I just go by this suspension, this is the gap between me and the guys in front of me, you're probably wrong about that.
Yeah.
Of course, you know what? This is America. People capitalize on your insecurities, and they're going to take your money and tell you that the setting is what you need. But the reality is, if you're uncomfortable with a great setting versus really comfortable with a poor setting, you'll probably be better on the comfortable setting. So that's a tough one. I do agree with Deegan. I do agree with Hunter. And Jett said this recently this weekend. I watched all the post race stuff, this particular race I hadn't previously.
Yeah.
He basically said that they made a lot of progress this week, which tells you, they couldn't have been that far off. Like, yeah, you might choose stiff or soft, but if you can make huge progress in 1 week, it was just figuring out a little bit the direction they needed to go. And then he said, basically, I just need to go log laps this week. So they know that too. Like, okay, I think the bike's close enough. Obviously, he got second. Obviously, he was able to challenge for pace. So they know that even if the bike's not perfect, if he had been a little more comfortable on that bike, he probably would have been better. And so they're going to try to go get that comfortability of just knowing his bike this week. Him and Hunter will just go pound laps, and they're going to identify weaknesses, write them down, tell the team where they're at. But essentially, they're not going to try to make too many changes this week and probably next, because they're going to get a long list of data. They're going to say, the bike's a little stiff, a little soft, in my opinion today. Is that opinion true tomorrow? Is that opinion true on the weekend? Is that opinion true next week? And if that opinion continues to hold true for 2 weeks, they're going to go change it. But if they keep changing the bike, every single practice he goes out there, he can't do which I'll ask you in this podcast today too. I mean, from the coach Robb standpoint, you're like, hey, I need my athlete to put in whatever your workload is. You need to go ride this many laps. You need to go ride the mountain bike. If you're spending all day testing,
Yep,
you can't do your routine. So I think that's part of it. Parents need to be aware of both. But yes, bike setup's important. But once you get to a point where you're like, okay, I think it's pretty close, your kid's going to be far better getting comfortable on it than it is you chasing settings all day. I think it's like building blocks with the base. You build a base body you talk about all the time. Yep. I think you build a base and setting. You work on setting in a chunk of the year when you can. And then after you get really, 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 really close, it should just be notes on what I'd like to improve, and maybe we can make those steps, but it shouldn't be like every single week you're changing the bike. I always laugh, and I'll let you, ask the next question is, it's hilarious to me that parents will go to an amateur national and then get their suspension done midweek by some other suspension company. Yeah. And then the kid, of course, is going to be like, yeah, it's way better because dad just spent $1,500. Yeah, eat it or whatever brand he wanted, right? Yeah. The kid's is stoked because it must solve his problem. But I have never seen a kid who's doing poorly go get his suspension done, and all of a sudden the results got better. Basically, the kid's like, oh, it's way better. I'm not used to it yet, but it's way better. And it's like, he didn't even get better results. So that to me is just asinine. Like, you're going to really mid-moto go change his whole motorcycle up. And then the flip side of that is, if you're a suspension company and you're doing that midweek, like, you're literally just preying on people's insecurity there, which, hey, maybe someday we'll have a trackside, big national setup. There you go. We'll probably do what half these companies do, which is a clickers and stickers and service program, right? Where, hey, yeah, we swap their stickers for our stickers. We put fresh fluid and seals in there, and here's your bill, because they probably look at the settings and go, well, that's not a bad setting.
exactly.
Maybe the kid will like it better with our brand on it than with that brand on it,
Or hopefully they'll trust us enough to come over and you'll give them an honest answer, and you don't need to take $1. It's like we've talked about before, when someone comes to me after Loretta's and they're like, oh, I got to get in shape. I'm like, no, dude, you're just chronically dehydrated before you got there. You were screwed before you began. So we're now looking at baseline numbers and you look great.
Right.
For those of you who may be listening to this, maybe a year or so after, because that's a beautiful part about these videos, they stay up for forever. Derek, I always say our content is not something that's what's the most recent going on. So we don't get the 20, 30,000 hits initially. But I've got a video on how to use a swim kickboard that has over 1 million views.
Right.
My reason for giving that context is, if you're not sure what we're talking about, depending on when you're listening to this, it's the beginning of 2025. We were talking about round 1 where Jett Lawrence, the rear end of the Hondas for both Hunter and Jett, were not staying low. They weren't staying on the ground through the whoops. And they came out and had, as everybody's talked about, Jett had his worst performance finish in the 450 class since he started it at the ripe age of, what is he now, 20? So he's now a veteran in the class. But just so everybody has a reference point, we're talking about Anaheim 1, 2025. Derek, you brought something up, because I wasn't surprised, but I was actually pleased when Jett made that comment about, we're going to stop trying to work on setup and we're going to go back and pound laps, like you articulated. When you go back to A1, and obviously James Stewart was the first one to be vocal about it, even during the broadcast, and said, watch the rear end. It's not tracking through the whoops, and Jett's riding a bike, bucking bronco. From a parent seeing their son or daughter riding and the bike's doing that, what do you think should have been done? What was done? And again, you're spitballing here, but based on your experience, what adjustments do you think they did, and what could a parent do based on what they saw at A1 with Jett's bike?
Yeah. So the conundrum you're in is, do we change it today? or do you go rod? Because they've already logged laps on that setting.
Yeah.
And so I think that they chose not to really mess with it very heavily. I think obviously it was an anomaly. Both brothers were competitive. They just got really bad results.
Yeah.
So it's not like, you can attribute all of that failure to the bike. I mean, Jett got, Anderson did what Anderson does and got a great start despite all odds and kind of used Jett to do that. And then, of course, Jett made a mistake, crashed in the sand. I'm not going to say that crash was bike related. I don't think it was.
Exactly. A lot of people went down there.
Yeah, he went fast for the whoops, kind of around the outside of somebody and, was trying to make passes early, got antsy, and made a crash, right? And then after that, I think they just settled in and just, all right, it's way better to finish this race in a DNF, right?
Yeah, you can't win this championship in the first race, but you damn sure could lose it.
And Hunter looked racy up front and then made a big mistake and goes backwards. So is what it is. But I think from what they said and then from what everybody was kind of seeing, to me, the bike looked, and I actually text someone in the directly in the Lawrence area, but he's like a practice bike mechanic for him. And I was just spitballing off my thoughts and what I, thought and whatnot. And he kind of, he obviously is an observer too. So he's not, this is nothing privy or anything. He kind of said similar plus his insights. But basically, I thought the bike looked really tall in the rear and it looked very steep in the front, whereas like it looked like the front tire was underneath the frame. And it just looked to me like, even though it was steep in the front and tall in the rear, they could not get the front end to bite. And so what was happening was the front tire would kind of just never give them the confidence to turn. And they're always waiting on it to turn. And if you've ever ridden a bike that's set up like that, where you keep adding weight to the front tire, trying to get it to bite, and it doesn't, it's like you just don't understand it, because normally that might work. And you keep going, you keep going, you keep going. You're like, I don't understand why the bike won't turn. Ultimately, what happens is eventually you find a setting where the back's not so jacked up, the front's a little more compliant, and all of a sudden the bike kind of sets down and turn. Everything works better. I think that's what they were off on. That's just based on my observation. What looked like to me when the track was smooth to them, the bike looked good. Like in early qualifying, when they got on the gas early in the corners, like the Lawrences normally do, then it weighted the rear. Everything worked. They got on the gas and the bike really looked decent. But the problem was when they couldn't quite get the front end to grab that bite, or they weren't getting on the gas hard and early.
Yeah.
And none of the setting worked. And so, and Tomac, give credit to the telecast. They did a great job. I think it was Brayton, and I think it was AC on the Supercross Live talking about how Tomac's rear end is really stiff versus an average Joe, because he gets on the gas so hard and that he needs the bike to stay up in the back. Right. So you can't run that setting if you're not riding the bike the way that he rides the bike. And that's a thing that I think was hurting the Lawrences. So I think they went back to the drawing board and said, okay, maybe we build a bike that's a little more forgiving, works when the track's rougher. Maybe there's some negatives to it when the track's smoother, but we're going to make the bike a little bit more well-rounded of a motorcycle. And they probably did that. To me, the bike didn't look drastically different this weekend, but clearly both brothers felt more comfortable. And I think that's just a matter of a little bit softer. They probably, I'm assuming, raked out the front a little bit more. They probably pulled a little height out of the rear, all these little things, just to make the bike, frankly, a lot more like Joe Shimoda's bike looked, which looked really good. So
yeah, because you're the engineer and I'm not, and I'm going to have to ask it in layman's questions. So if I understand you correctly, you're saying that if they can't get enough time to pivot and get on the gas early to get the bike to sit, they'll actually make an adjustment to the bike to try to accommodate. I know you can't accommodate because not every corner is identical. Are you talking about literally during the qualifying and stuff? Those are the types of adjustments they're making?
Yeah. So I think that if you went into the mechanics area, okay, you could turn a click one way or the other way. Right. Okay. We can soften the front, soften the rear, stiffen or whatever. But between sessions, it's not uncommon for teams to say, whoa, this is a little off. Let's go grab a different linkage arm, lowers the rear a millimeter or two, or, they got a couple of different sets of shocks, whatever they've identified through testing, they might throw at the bike. But then we run into that factor of, has he ridden it? Are they comfortable? Do they know what it's going to do? And Kenny talked about this too. And not last year, basically not showing up on a bike you weren't familiar with, so to speak. You'd rather ride something you're a little bit, not happy with, but you're familiar with. And I think all the pros are learning this. Every single one of them, like Chase last year, Kenny the year before, they worked so hard on the motorcycle, constantly chasing the bike, that they missed out on getting comfortable with it because they never spent hours on it. So I think that the Deegans, for whatever reason, you got to give them credit. They're clearly incredibly intelligent, and they clearly sample data around them and look at what the mistakes of others and try not to repeat them, which is essentially, all right, we used to think that the Star bike when we came onto this team was the best bike you could have. And if you listen to like Craig's, Nichols, who went there, It basically said, I knew I was going to a winning platform, so I didn't change it. Well, let's be honest, whether or not the bike was good to them, they didn't care, right?
Yeah.
They just rode the bike because they assumed it was a winning platform. So at the end of the day, that's I think the Deacons realize that. I think most of these, like Chase this year, he said the same thing. Last year, I didn't get a chance to learn my motorcycle. So this year, we were well more, he had a whole year of testing with the team. He basically put in the laps and logged the laps that he needed to log. And so that's, to me, should you change your bike all the time? No, but should you have to go back to our previous podcast, should you have a notebook on what settings do what? Yeah, you probably should. So that way, when you go to a really fast sand track, you kind of know what the chassis should be at. When you go to a really tight supercross track, a tighter track, you kind of know where your chassis should be at, because those would be different settings, wheelbase settings, fork height settings, how stiff you are, right? Same with tires. I mean, it's nowadays most people run pretty much one tire everywhere they go. But I mean, back in the day, you would bring a hard pack tire for hard pack tracks, and you would have a sand or a scoop tire for sand tracks. And it's the same thing with your bike. Your bike needs to be accommodated to those types of conditions.
Well, and you did a great job of answering that. And then you just added another layer of complexity. In your opinion, what is the difference? Chase even said it in the broadcast this weekend that last year at this time, he hadn't even gone through the whoop shed. He was so uncomfortable with the bike. Now, I know there's a whole year of R&D. There's a lot of money that gets put into these bikes, and they can change frames and forks and triple clamps and all that. Maybe you're in the know, and if you're at liberty to talk about it, if not, give us at least a ballpark. And what's so much different about the bike this year than last year, other than what you said, just put more time on it? What would be a significant difference that they made? Now, again, I'm asking this in layman's terms. The listeners may be like, it was so obvious. My question to you, is it? Was it? Factory team went to the first round and he wasn't hitting the whoop shed?
Yeah, that's a great question. I kind of, from what I had understand and heard, was, that was essentially a little bit of a platform changeover when Chase was headed over there.
Okay.
So they're coming off of a proven Cooper Webb platform, then won races in championships, to a slightly new updated platform. KTM's motivation behind that, I think they were addressing some what they thought were the weak links of the old bike. In my opinion, the weak links of the old bike were it squatted too much, it was too low in the rear, and I don't ride Supercross, personally, obviously at the level that they ever do, I never did. So, that's just, those guys are insane. But, the feedback was maybe the frame was too soft. Everybody talks about the KTM frame being soft. Maybe that was the case. So the new bike gets a stiffer frame. It gets some updates where they change the pivot locations around. It's a super complicated subject. But basically, when you hit the throttle, it changed the geometry of the rear end, and it wants to extend the rear more on the new bike. The bike overall feels taller because of that. So when you get on the gas, it squats less than it used to. If you're into cars or drag racing, there's the anti-squat and anti-wheelie. It's all these things you can do through geometry. And of course, dirt bikes have the same function. So they changed all that around. And then, stiffness of the frame got updated, things like that. Well, then they felt like they maybe went a little too stiff, right? So this newer bike got a softer frame. From what I've heard and kind of seen around and looked, and, give the media credit for running cover for these manufacturers a lot, but they basically were really smart at KTM, where they softened this frame up, but they did so in a way that they identified exactly where you could soften that frame and safely. But then they made it so that a factory team, according to the rules in the US, they're allowed to add material back. You're not allowed to take it away, but you're allowed to add it back. So now you have a plethora of options. You have the new softer frame, you have the old stiffer frame, which both were legal to run that year because it was a factory edition. They did the softer frame. That was last year. And then you have whatever the team wants to fabricate in between. So you can take the softer frame and start bulking it in, however you want, right? Okay, we're going to add a stiffener here. We're going to add a brace and a gusset there. Because in the Cooper Webb days, people don't realize, but the factory frame, they do such a good job of hiding it. But it had welded components on that old chassis that made it way stiffer. And actually, at the tail end of Webb's career, there was a lot going on behind the scenes where he wasn't really sure that that's what he wanted, but the team was mandating him ride that. So what I think happened is the team opened up they've opened up a lot and said, sure, you want to run these forks? Okay, give it a shot. You want to run? Okay, well, we're willing to try things that we weren't willing to try before. And I think that last year they were going through all those frame iterations, basically saying, well, we can kind of build you anything you want. We can go from soft, which is what the consumer really needs. We don't need a Supercross capable bike. You can sit here and watch a podcast and think that you do, but let's be honest, you're not Chase Sexton. There's only one of those guys out there. So, you don't need what he needs. And so they build a bike that you and I would hop on and think is more comfortable. but then they built everything in between. And I think that unfortunately for Chase, he was right at the wrong time for KTM, meaning they didn't have a platform that somebody had really sorted out for them at the top level. And that was Chase's job. And he came in just, oh, sorry, what do you want? And he doesn't know. The reality is he's learning too. He's young. I mean, the guy's really young. So I think that's what happened. And then this year they found right at the comfort level that he's happy with. Okay, yep, this is the frame configuration you really like. Probably closer to stock than ever, I would be willing to bet. And then he's had enough time. Okay, now that I'm, imagine having to test 10 frame configurations, 25 suspension configurations, in every little thing you could do. What is the math on that, right? It's just 10 to the, it just gets into
The 10th power,
so it's probably better to pick one frame that's in the middle of the road. Yeah, it's not the best at everything, but I'm fine with it. And now, okay, we know this is the ballpark on suspension. This range, we're going to stick with this. And from what Pulp said, and he said it on some interview, he was now playing around with little details that we don't do as, I don't do as an amateur shop, but like they're moving his seat height up and down, like little things like that, like moving the little center of gravity things around.
Yep.
Not things that you would think about, but he's in a place where now the bike's capable. It's just fine tuning that capability for him. And I think this year the bike looks, both on Juju and on Chase, of all the manufacturers' bikes out there, Honda, Yamaha, and KTM, and Kenny's bike's a little bit of Kenny's his own animal, right?
Yeah.
The KTM looks the most balanced to me, meaning it's just front to back, very level all the time. And I think if you really watch the Lawrence's bike and you really watch Tomac's bike, they're really tall in the rear. I mean, it's crazy. We've never seen bikes like this. And actually, I'll give Villapoto and RC. Villapoto talked about how back in their day, and this is back in my day, people would lower subframes, lower shocks, lower the rear end very popularly.
Yep.
Now the factory teams are doing the opposite. They're adding length. They're making the bikes taller. And that makes a lot of sense for Supercross, in my opinion. But that said, that's totally counterintuitive of anything we've ever thought of.
Sure.
So if you really look, I mean, even look at Ferrandis's bike versus Jett's bike and just look at the height of the rear end and how much gap there is between the tire and the fender. Jetts and Hunters are taller. And the same with Tomac's. I mean, just look at those Yamahas. They have really long rear ends when they're fully extended. And I think that's the KTM does not look that way to me. Chase does not look that same direction. And from what I've heard over the years, he doesn't like that. He likes a very flat, balanced, not tall in the rear bike. So, that's what I think they figured out. They have now granted he fell this weekend, but I don't know if I attribute that. I don't think that was a bike fall, right? He was in the track.
Right. Yeah. So you just uncovered something that I think would be interesting. One of the subjects that are floating around in my DMs was the idea that here Jett was giving and praise, Hunter both were giving praise to the Honda platform outdoors, but then can't seem to get it settled going into Supercross. They were kind of throwing him under the bus, saying you can't have it both ways. You talked about the idea that you've got Chase that was going over to KTM when that transition was taking place. Or was it Webb that you said? I think it was Chase, right?
It's Chase. Yeah, Chase moving to KTM when they were transitioning platform.
Transitioning. And is it fair to say that Hunter and Jett are almost in the same ballpark because we have 100%. This new okay. I want to make sure that I understood you correctly there.
Right.
Because it gives credit to what they were able. Right. Well, yes, sir. And what I think is so interesting is if that's indeed the case, look at how quickly, this is not a jab on Sexton. Sexton struggled when he couldn't get that balance. James would say, tuck the front, son, tuck the front, right? You look at the fact that Hunter and Jett went 11 and 12 at A1, and then unfortunately Hunter was sick, but he still got inside the top 10 this weekend, and Jett goes from 11th to 2nd. How quickly he was able to get that figured out. I give all the credit where credit's due. Dazzy, the whole KTM platform, Jay Dungey, all those guys. Excuse me, Jade's over at KTM now, but everybody at that HRC side, how much progress they made in 1 week. And here's my $1 million question to you. You made a comment that Sexton's bike is probably a little closer to stock manufacturing. Do you think that they did that with Jett's as well? Like you say, you changed too many variables. You don't know which one's working and what's not. Do you go back to baseline pretty much?
Probably true, right? So frame-wise, their old factory frame, not a secret, was welded and braced and whatever. That had gotten out there. The magazines caught wind of it.
Yeah.
I think the new frame is stock off the showroom, no welding, no bracing. So that was a big change that Honda did for them. I think that a lot of the things they were doing to make the old platform work, that their theories were, which was some of this picking the rear of the bike up and how fast they, and I want to take credit for this, not like that I pushed this, but like way back when on the Hopper podcast that I talked about how fast Tomac's rear end was and rebound. I'd never seen a supercross bike like that in my entire life up until that time. And I never had. And now go watch all the team's bikes. They're all fast from KTM. KTM at that time, if you watch Malcolm's bikes and all the KTM bikes in they never returned. Like the rear ends were slow. That was the kind of the RC era of thinking. So now I think, that has just pervaded throughout the industry. And I think the Lawrences were big on making that come. Like they were a believer in that as well. And then I think Tomac's camp, specifically Tomac's camp, was big on that. And Tomac's camp was also big on a tall rear end. He if you watch him ride, he's a bigger guy. He sits in the corner a lot, no leg out. And he's actually a little bit further back on the bike than a lot of coaches, quote unquote, coach. He doesn't look that far back, but watch his seat position when you really watch him ride. And that's partly his size, right? He's so big. If you try to scoot up, your knees and stuff don't get in a good position. So he does that, but in order to make that work, he needs the bike taller because he's putting more weight back on it. So if you just see the bike sitting without him on it, it's tall. I think that the Lawrences have gone now more the production route. They're starting out that, but they've tried to apply concepts that worked on the old bike. Suspension settings, suspension heights, suspension and chassis balance types things, because that's where you started off at. You have all these clamps. That's what you knew. Unfortunately, it's a little bit different animal. It's a little bit different bike. And so as a byproduct of that, now you got to wade through the testing that Chase did all last year, right? You did all this testing for Honda previously. You guys were instrumental in that and getting the bike where you liked it, but that was a lot of testing. Now you're going to go back through that on a new platform. And that's like Formula One or whatever, these new platforms come out and they develop it. Well, now the Lawrences are in the quote unquote developing phase. And we're going to get to see how good that crew really is. And from what, by all accounts, from everybody that, I've talked to around there, they're confident that the Honda crew that's around the Lawrences, they are, they don't think they're better than everybody. Mm-hmm. What they're confident in is that they're willing to work hard enough to get it right. Like that's the Dazzy approach. If we're not there today, we're going to work to be there tomorrow. If the bike's not there today, we're going to work to be there tomorrow. And I think that as a parent, that's your goal. Your goal is to say, hey, if the bike is a little bit off today, then we can work on it for tomorrow. But right now we're going to race what we got. And number two applies to your kid. I mean, I'll give the Lawrences a tremendous amount of credit for changing the sport this way. Because, Dungey era was like, the bike. I got to work on the bike. Nothing. He never would. He was great ambassador, but that has pervaded throughout the pits now. Constantly bike evolution. And the Lawrences say, the bike could be a little bit better, but so can I. Jett said in the post-race interview, and one of them I watched, which essentially was, and I was going to ask you questions about physiology in this. Hopefully I can get
Rush. We can do it again next month. No worries.
He said, part of his problems are he's in all his habits of the old bike. He said, so some of the things that need to happen is not that the bike needs to change, but for example, on the old bike, I needed to get a little bit further back at times. And on this new bike, I need to stay further forward. But unfortunately, my muscle memory is on the old bike. And then, he talked on it takes 30 days, 30 times a day to break a habit. He's like, I don't have that time. So I'm going to have to really be conscious to get forward, whatever he was saying in that moment, that essentially each configuration can probably work equally well. But the rider has to adapt himself to what each one does well. And that's one thing as a parent, you've got to understand that your rider is more adaptable than the bike.
Right.
So why aren't you telling your rider to adapt? And that's what the Lawrence, if the Lawrences want to win this title, whether the bike's good or bad, he has to win it. There's no excuse, right? And that's what I love about the Dazzy approach is, and same with Tomac. I mean, I think that all those guys, you want to be a champion, you want to be a winner. I don't care what your excuses are. Leave them at the door and go get the job done. And then when you go home, go work on the things that you think need work.
Exactly. You brought up something that I think is pretty interesting, and we see this and hear about this quite often is, you can't work but with one riding coach. And I think it goes back to when you get used to training on one track, when you get used to training with one trainer, well, you get good at just that. Like a lot of the agents like to call the facility kids one track wonders. You pretty much blindfold a kid and he can go around that track wide open and be within a half a second, 30 laps in a row, because that's all he or she knows. Unfortunately, change conditions, all of a sudden, top rider is now mid-pack pretty quickly. And I think it's important for what you just said. And there's been a lot of documentation, whether it's Gypsy Tales or the various podcasts that Hunter, Jett, and Dazzy have been on. Think about how much they had to adapt and overcome when they went over to Europe. Promised the world, very few people delivered. So they're riding a piece of this, a part of that, a half of this, and that. They sold everything at home, right? Like we say in the business world, if you want to really get good at something, eliminate all options. You had no options. There are no alternatives. It's this way, and you got to make it work. You know, and we say this with our entrepreneurial business as well. You know, when we see this a lot. People will get a business to mediocre, and then they start running in because we say, where's the bottleneck of a company? It's always at the top. Well, CEOs don't like to admit that there's a problem, and they're the problem. So instead of solving the problem, what do? They just start another business segment. So you just keep duplicating the same problems. And that's exactly what we're talking about here. If you can't learn to take it apart, either set the bike, because this is where we get into the chicken or the egg, right? Are you trying to ride a bike as Jett is because it's already been balanced and set for you? Now you've got to accommodate its characteristics because the bike was balanced first, or are you not able to ride it because the bike's not balanced? This goes back literally, Derek, to our very first show. Start with baseline, know what you like, know what you don't like, then take what you like, take it to conditions you don't like. You already know the conditions you like with the bike you like. Take a bike you like to conditions you don't like. We're getting into that exponential game, right? You draw a block, you have a bike you like, and you go ride conditions you like. You have a bike you don't like, you can either go ride conditions you like or conditions you don't like. But at the end of the day, what's in the middle of all four? If you take the square and you put a circle in the middle, that's where the winner's at. Sometimes the bike is balanced, but you're not riding it the way it needs to be ridden for that track.
And that's the biggest flaw of athletes, right?
Well,
Putting a square peg in a round hole.
Well, here's what's interesting. If I take something like my professional cyclist, we will do a bike fit kit based on the characteristics of the race. So if we have a hilly course, we're going to slide the seat back because we're going to be doing more seated climbing. We're going to maybe even change frame geometry where we move with the bike based on the bottom bracket to the seat. So if we do have to do a lot of out of saddle climbing, you want a short rear end so the bike accelerates. You've got a lot less moving parts on a bicycle, right? I move the seat forwards or backwards. I move the fore-aft positioning of the pedal. I can move where I can move where the head of your femur is in relationship to the bottom bracket in front or behind. Because you take a professional triathlete or a time trial road bike, you want the pelvic girdle to be in front of the bottom bracket because you're not trying to generate raw power. You need aerodynamics, et cetera, et cetera. The problem with the motorcycle is how many different ways can you set up just the front end?
Well, your analogy there is on the bicycle, you're moving where they sit or these relationships of parts and pieces. You're moving some parts around.
Yep.
Guess what? On our dirt bike, you can do that without changing a part in your bike by using your body position.
Exactly.
So that's the thing that people need to realize is that you, the rider, are super influential on how your motorcycle works. So, for example, if your front end is a little too soft, get further back in general. If your front end's too stiff, you're going to have to get further forward in general. And your kid needs to know that. And I get we're in habits, but dirt bikes is so reactionary that, realistically, you shouldn't just be in one place of the bike at all times. You should be where you need to be on the bike for that scenario. And that's
excuse me, how many times have you been at the track and you hear it, and I'm not throwing the young kids under the bus, but they said, this is what I was told to do in this situation, and I did it, and it bit me. I went down, tucked the front end or whatever. And I think that is what we're talking about that I hope the parents don't miss. Please don't train your athlete to say it's this way and it's the only way. Let's go to the obvious big elephant in the room, right? So it's Jett and Sexton all stand up in the corners. So now nobody sits down in the corners. Now not all riding coaches, but a lion's share of the riding coaches. See, it works for Jett. It works for Chase. They're the most dominant champions. And then you just brought up the fact that Tomac sits more often. Oh no, now what are we going to tell the kids? Because we just told them for the last year when Tomac wasn't winning that it's all about these two guys that are winning. So that's now the gospel. Stop.
But yeah, it's just like find your own style, right?
Well, but even deeper than that, add 17 more layers. Get a bike that's balanced, and you as an athlete can tell Derek, the suspension specialist, how you like the bike. Therefore, he can set it up. Understand that the setup isn't going to be perfect if we talk about literally just raising or lowering the forks, right?
Yep.
Gain some high-speed stability, lose some high-speed stability.
And a bike doesn't go, we've dealt with guys who are like, okay, you move their fork 1 millimeter, right? It goes from rideable to unrideable.
Yep.
I'm sorry, dude. No, it didn't.
Right.
It might be way better or not better in your opinion, but you should be able to make your way around that change.
Yeah.
It's like we're making a 0.5% or something. So you should be able to ride that. Same with clickers. I mean, someday we'll have a video on this. It's on the queue. I just need to organize it.
Yep.
The reason revalves exist is because you can't click your suspension far enough for what you might want. Sometimes you may not really need a revalve, but that's really the extent of it. There's clickers. We talked about this. That's your clicker range. And a revalve can do either way. So if you're at one end of the clicker or the other, then you need a revalve, to put the clickers back in the middle. That's all that's really doing. I mean, there's no magic to what a revalve really does conceptually. And people really struggle with this. It's no different. Like we sell these little ignition boxes all the time. I mean, this is one of our best sellers as a shop. And we're really the only shop in the moto community that brought this about mainstream. Now a lot of shops are selling them.
Yeah.
I have a whole YouTube video out on why and what ignition curves do. What people don't grasp is that just because this is gray or this one's green doesn't make it better. It's not what's special about it. What's special about it is what's up in here that we put into that box. And sometimes it's better than stock. Sometimes it's not, pending your application. Really about matching this to your application to get the best out of it. So we're building a package.
Well, you're back to learning curve again. It's not an absolute zeros. You made a little quippy comment earlier. They go back to the truck. They add a 1 millimeter linkage. Think about the mathematical combinations you just changed on the chassis just by adding 1 millimeter to the linkage. Under acceleration, not under acceleration, standing up, sitting down, little forward, little back. Now, before we go any further, I don't want the listeners to get overwhelmed. Instead, have that epiphany where you're like, okay, I'm gonna use myself as an example. I'm not an idiot because I couldn't figure all this out. Well, stop trying to figure it out and go get a riding coach, a multitude of riding coaches. Go get with somebody like Derek that can help you understand suspension. And it goes back to what we've said numerous times. Please start understanding what you like. Therefore, people around you can help you get the bike how you like it.
Yeah. If your kid can't communicate that and he's pushing in on mini senior class,
yes,
like he's becoming a young adult in our sport by 15, if you're really good, you're getting close to pro, right? Deegan handed off at a pro team at 16 years old.
Yep.
And let's just say that's 18, right? Like, okay, you're 18 or you're 19, but basically let's say that happens. Your kid needs to be able to communicate to that staff something useful to them. Otherwise, they just can't get the bike better. And there's nothing worse as being, all these staff members at these teams, at these aftermarket shops, if they're worth their weight as a company, which most of them have been around a while, are pretty dang good. They don't want to deal with somebody who's like, it sucks. They need to say what's good, what's bad. Give me the facts. I'm going to go work on the facts. And from there, and then they need a rider who understands that. And unfortunately, if you're building up an athlete, quote unquote, who is that individual, as a parent, that's on you. You don't hear that from the Lawrences. You don't hear that from Chase. I mean, Chase has been very critical, but I think this whole last year for him has also been educationary. He has learned, he had to leave his knowledge base, the crew that he was with, who kind of probably had worked their brain around what Chase speak was. Sure. Chase says something's trash or this, or they know what he needs, right? But they had to learn that. Well, he had to go to a whole new team in a whole new language. And anytime you're new, it's like dating a new chick or whatever, you're going to put your best self on. So Chase kind of had to put his best foot forward. The team put their best foot forward. But I guarantee you, if you were to ask him today, how good are your bike communication skills now versus when you came to KTM, he'd say night and day better.
Yeah.
Now it's to be more of it. So now I can communicate, in my mind, what I'm trying to communicate. I have to communicate that in a way that somebody who's an engineer or staff technician can understand what I'm saying. So that's probably something that's grown for him. He's still really young. He's a veteran to us, but he's still really young. And I think that your job as a parent is to do your best to hand off a young athlete, whoever they're going to do work with, to be functional in communication, right? They don't have to be the best communicator ever, but they definitely need to be able to be functional at it. And that's important. Otherwise, no offense to the parents, no offense to the shops out there, but you're just buying garbage. Because if the kid gives the guy garbage info, then you're just going to get, all right, whatever, here's our setting. I don't know what your kid really wants. We think this is good. Here you go. And if it happens to be the exact opposite of what your kid really wants, sorry, you did not communicate what you wanted. That's on you.
Let me bring up somebody that I think is a perfect example of this. And we're hoping to get his dad on, was Alan C., Adam's dad. Adam's dad did not grow up. He's never had a motorcycle in his life, right? And yet AC went on to be the winningest rider at Loretta's in the history of Loretta's. And I want to hammer that home as hard as I can. You can't say that AC's success was because Alan grew up on a dirt bike. It was the exact opposite. Obviously, I had the privilege of working with AC, but if you could be around Alan, when they came in off the track, it wasn't, we were talking about what's for lunch. We weren't talking about what's for dinner. It wasn't talking about the chick that was in the vehicle next door. It was all about taking the bike apart. It was taking the track apart. It was, how did you feel? What about this line choice? Alan would ask, why did you take that line? Not because he was challenging him that he was wrong. He was always trying to get Adam to justify what you did. Now, when I say justify it, we're not saying it was a right or a wrong, because that's the thing with racing, right? You could take the same line for 3 laps, and on lap number 4, it bites you. And you're like, yeah, but it was great for 3. It doesn't make you a loser. That's what's great about racing. How quickly can you pick yourself up and get back on the bike and haul ass again?
Be conscious about the decisions you make too.
Yes. Well, and that's where I think Alan did a phenomenal job. So for people who think, well, because I didn't grow up with a moto dad, well, AC, remember, only person in history that went from a super mini to a factory 250 program when Mitch plucked him and put him on the PC team.
So, and he didn't have quite the pro career that everybody thought he would have. Obviously, the flashes of brilliance were there, meaning you can't argue that he set fastest laps. You can't argue that he won a 250 title. You can't argue that as a rookie, he went out and was phenomenal, like no really other rookie had been on a 250 Supercross, right? He got hurt that year, but he was out front winning races. So
I was going to say he won in his first year.
Right.
But it wasn't, the reasons why he didn't have the career, and hopefully we'll be able to do a show about this one day. The fact was he was working underneath a program that literally ruined him physically. It ruined him and his teammate, and they both have been public about it. My point is, him not going the distance was 99% on the physical side. It was not about what his knowledge was in regards to setting up a bike.
Listen to him talk now.
Yeah, well, that's like you say, it's what makes him such a great commentator. He's got that James Stewart ability to see something, which is very hard. And not that we're encouraging all the parents to, hey, raise your son or daughter to become a commentator, but think about AC now. He's got a second career in the sport because of what he learned literally when he was on Super Minis. And I wish I could have recorded those conversations, because it was casual. It's just like you and I speaking. But you're taking a young, and when I was working with Adam, he hadn't even hit puberty yet, right? Taking a prepubescent son with a dad who didn't ride moto, and all they were is they're just the masters of taking it apart, apply the chess game, take it apart, apply the chess game, have great communication skills. And the idea here is Alan would challenge Adam constantly, but it was perceived that he was hard on him. And Alan's big thing is you've got to learn how to think. And you're a very young man, and I'm as an adult trying to help you understand how to speed up the learning curve.
Well, what do we say about, my dad used to say, my dad's really smart, had great memory and better than mine. And basically he would say, if I'd ask him a trivia question, he's like, I don't know. I don't care about trivia.
I love that.
Right. I care how to solve problems. I want to know how, learn how to learn, more importantly than learn random facts. And if you like trivia, great. Like if your brain loves it,
exactly
for you, that's not a problem for me, but at the end of the day, I don't want to memorize how to do this math problem. I want to know how to figure out how to do the math problem every time.
Yeah.
And so the process, the skills necessary. So by challenging your son on why'd you make this line, it shouldn't be like you said, it should be challenging and asking and rationalizing, but it shouldn't be like, oh, it's because it's wrong. I'm asking you, hey, put me through what you went through. What were you thinking? From what I saw, because his dad doesn't know, he knows obviously because he went through racing.
Sure.
From what we saw from the outside, Adam, is maybe this other line looked a little better to us midway through the race, but I want to see why you felt like the outside was better and I thought the inside was better. And Adam comes up with, well, man, I went there once and you saw that lap. It was really bad. Okay, yeah, I did see that lap. Maybe your competition did it better. So now we go to the memory bank. Let's go home and work on something about that inside that we weren't good at, that our competition was, that forced you to go outside.
Yep.
Or, hey, we're a little weak in the rollers today. Is it the bike? Is it you? Is it technique? What's going on there? And I think that's the key. Tony Alessi's, you really look at those two, they probably have very similar approaches.
Absolutely.
Right. And I guarantee you, I've been around Chase's dad a little bit, and Chase, and they're the same way behind the scenes. Constantly dad's challenging, questioning, how that works, because that's how they're pushing themselves. Same with the Lawrences, same with Tomac, I'm sure. I mean, I don't know how much involved he is now, but John Tomac was a huge part of the Tomac program, even through his early 250 pro career.
Absolutely.
And if you really ever, talk to them and work with them, they were very analytical about how to be better. It's not just like, let's just try to be better. It's like, what did we do bad? Same with the bike. What can we do better? What can we make better? And let's get better.
Well, and it's also about managing expectations, because when you look at John, when they hired Eli at Geico, John went to him and said, if you're expecting a championship out of him in the next 2 years, you have the wrong guy. Don't sign us. And the fact that he went out and won his first race kind of put a little bit of beginner's luck, call it whatever you will, but it's about managing expectations. It's about playing the long game. This is something that I always have found very interesting. Is here I live in Orlando. AC grew up in Orange City, which is literally adjacent to the speedway there in Daytona. Where did Adam and Alan spend the majority of their time? They jumped in their motorhome and they were in California. I mean, literally parking in the pro circuit parking lot so that they could get good on a type of dirt that they weren't growing up with. And then what was it that Mitch and Alan would do? Alan was invested. He would go in, he would talk to Mitch. Mitch would ask questions. How's it handling? What's it doing? What's it not doing? Now, not all of us have a direct line to Mitch. I understand that. But what I will give Alan credit for was he built a relationship and then he used it in a proper way. He used it as an opportunity because who is Mitch's right-hand man? Bones Bacon, probably one of the smartest, next to yourself, Derek. I don't think I've ever met someone who can articulate and is as smart when it comes to those little minute details.
That's made that duo great, and that's Bones is an absolute.
He's a legend.
Yeah, he's the
absolute,
unquestionably one of the best ever at it. And maybe nowadays things change from what he theorized and thought, but I guarantee you, if you put a little time into it today, he'd start thinking. He's innovative, right? So that he's just willing to work. Yeah. Keep partnering on like this process, I think, is what we're getting to, right? It's a process, and it's not just an answer of it's this part, that part, this suspension guy, that suspension guy. It's how those people get to the end result that you want to learn. And that's important. Actually, so it's funny, not to cut you too short on that. I was gonna say, I had a question I was watching the interview with Jett.
Yes.
Post-race, and he was on a bicycle doing a post-race cool down. I thought, what better thing to touch on than like just that basic physiological thing. Is that common?
Well, it is common in every sport that's endurance related. And the easiest example, and I would encourage everybody who's listening to go Google it and look it up on YouTube. If you watch the Tour de France guys, even if they've only got a 10-mile time trial, they will get on a stationary trainer underneath the awning, headphones on, sniffing salts in their nose, and they'll sit there and they'll spin for an hour. So they're sweating profusely. They get what's called the lactic acid shuffle activated. And literally, they will spin for an hour, hour and a half, go up, get in the start box, drop in, hammer a time trial, come off the course, immediately get back on the bike, bring the heart rate down slowly. And our sport, it's not, especially for those that make the podium, right? Even if it's at Loretta's and you got to go into impound and you got to sit in the, maybe you got a whole shot, get an interview, you get top 3, get another interview. In a perfect physiological world, and you see this a lot in track and field, you'll have Usain Bolt at a warm up for an hour to run under 9 seconds. But then when the race is over, what does he keep doing? And I want people to go back and look at the video. You notice when he's taking his little parade march around the track, he's bringing the heart rate down. Yes, he's acknowledging the crowd, but behind the scenes underneath. And then if you watch, especially on Netflix, they have that track and field series. I forgot what it's called. And you notice that there's a track adjacent to the main one. They warm up over there. They walk in, they go in the room, they get undressed, they come out to crowd race. Where do they go? They go back to the other track and they jog. And what there is
a cool down process to this.
It is actually a part of the recovery process. Okay. Actually, we have multi-days that, 100%.
Okay.
Now, think about this. If we'll put it in moto terms, imagine you have the throttle wide open and then you chop the throttle. All that fuel's backed up in the fuel line, right? Remember back in the days, you'd turn your bike to off and then you'd run it. Therefore, you had nothing left in the carburetor. Why'd you do that? To make sure nothing was left in the carburetor that could gunk up or whatever.
Right.
So when your blood vessels are wide open, the alveoli in your lungs are wide open. If you go from 190 beats and you shut it down to 60, and for those of you who are athletic, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It doesn't, when you have a strong aerobic engine, the recovery is anywhere between, we measure it in 30, 60, and 90 seconds. So when Derek does an interval, what we measure is, let's say we're doing 5 1-mile intervals, bicycle, rower, maybe it's 1,000 meters, running, whatever it is. At the end of the interval, we look at the elapsed time for that interval. Let's say you're running a 1/4 mile on the track. Let's say you're doing 1,000 meters on the rower. Let's say you're doing a 1-mile interval on the bicycle. We take the elapsed time, we take the average and the max heart rate, and the way that a lot of science here, but I think anyone who's plugged into the show digs this. What we look at is, what did Derek's heart rate max get to at the end of interval 1, and how quickly, what was his heart rate at 30, 60, and 90, and we're starting the next interval at 2 minutes. Then you compare interval 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is another way that we study lactate tolerance, and it's again a bunch of numbers like with your world. So what you're able to look at is how well are you able to recover 30, 60, and 90 over 6 intervals that might take, let's say if you're running on the track, 90 seconds, 6-minute mile. So you run a mile and a half, 6 quarters at a 6-minute pace, and you look at the pace of the interval. You want to have less than a 1-second deviation. That pace has got to be relevant to what your running race pace is for a 5K or a 10K. You make some adjustments, and then you reverse engineer that. Well, think about what you do. Let's say we were going to run intervals. You go to the track. What do? You warm up. If you got out of the car, laced up your shoes, and started doing quarter-mile intervals, you're going to tear something. You get to interval number 4 of 6, and you're like, man, I'm starting to feel good. Well, yeah, because you used 4 intervals to get warmed up.
Right?
There's the catch on the warm-up. But people forget the cool down. If you watch anybody that's an elite athlete, when they're done, oh, the work is done. Now we're going to start the recovery process. First thing they do, they hit some calories.
Yeah.
For those of you who have a background maybe in strength training, what is it we're doing? The 3-2, 4-1 ratio of carbohydrate to amino acids. That's what's in your drink. You're taking advantage of an enzyme known as a glycogen synthase enzyme. Think about it like a dry sponge. You just got done doing your interval work. Muscles are a sponge. You start putting some fluids in, they get sucked in. Glycogen synthase enzyme. So we've sped up recovery because you've absorbed nutrients, particularly amino acids, rebuilt muscle, depleted sugar, depleted electrolytes, and water. It's all part of the recovery. Well, because the heart rate is starting to come down, the core body temperature is starting to come down slowly. So another analogy, if I could pull your motor out after a 30-minute outdoor moto and throw it in an ice bath, what's it going to do to those engine casings?
Right.
It's going to crack them.
Yeah.
Right? Because of the thermal deviation, it's going to crack those casings. So this is one of the reasons why, like when you're at Loretta's, you don't want to go jump immediately into a cold ice bath or even in the river.
I had a question about that, right? Okay.
Because what it does is, unfortunately, it
Shuts off your
exhausts
system.
Absolutely. And so for anybody who's been in a cold environment, when you're outside at a football game, when you come in, you didn't play football, but why are you exhausted? You just sat and watched a football game.
Your body trying to stay warm, right?
Right. Shiver is ability to stay warm, which burns a tremendous amount of calories,
So
but it's very exhausting.
I had texted you about this, and then you said we'll talk about it today. But you had said something like, if you're fit, that cool down process is really, really important, right? Like
You're quantitative weight. Does it get added to your weekly volume?
Yeah, does it help to me, when I see them doing it, look like the zone 2, they're definitely that car rate up.
But on the warm up or cool down?
Cool down.
Yeah, cool down is going to be the lower the better.
Right. Like I kind of heard like Jett was doing his, and he was, right at that zone 2 where he's still breathing but can talk comfortably, but he's breathing. So that's kind of definitely above 1.
Well, and what you're doing is you're flushing a lot of the metabolic byproducts. So it's like the race.
So I was wondering about that. So that really is, you have it stored in your, all this stuff stored in you that you built up, metabolic byproducts.
Yep.
Is it once you're increasing your capillary and your blood flow and then by keeping that zone 2 or whatever?
Think about it in your worlds of motor, right? If I'm idling at 300 RPMs, I don't have a lot of combustion out the back. I hold that thing to 13,000, a lot more combustion.
But you don't want to load it so hard that it's building more byproduct, right?
Well, what you want to do is you use the warm up to vasodilate. It's kind of like as you start to roll your throttle. Can you imagine if you had an exhaust pipe that contracted as you opened it up, the motor would back up and it would grenade, or it certainly wouldn't perform optimally. This is where your warm up is so important, because everything vasodilates. And don't get caught up on the words. It's this simple. You eat a carbohydrate, apple. It gets stored as sugar, glycogen. When you start to bring your heart rate up and you're creating energy, your body converts stored sugar, glycogen, into pyruvic acid, and you start to create energy. Well, just like when you spark plug hits fuel, creates combustion, when the heart rate goes up and that sugar is being converted, and I'm using those interchangeably on purpose, stored sugar is glycogen. You store it in your liver for your brains and your muscles for movement. When you start tapping into that, there is a metabolic byproduct called lactic acid. When that starts to accumulate, it starts to burn because it has it has a pH level that makes it very acidic. That's where we get the word lactic acid. So the only thing lactic acid is a byproduct of converting stored sugar into energy, just like combustion in fuel. Well, as you bring the heart rate up, you start creating a lot of oxidative stress. What you're doing is you're literally releasing free radicals into the system. And that's what makes us look prematurely old. That's why you see a lot of triathletes that look like leatherback turtles, dark circles under their eyes.
I read an article about that the other day. Runners get old. Long distance runners get old.
Right. It's from the oxidative stress associated with high heart rate training, right? It only gets compounded when you're on a restricted diet. So you can see where that's a double-edged sword for 250 riders.
Yeah.
Marchbank's trying to stay light as a relatively big deacon.
And it just
He's already got Addison's disease. Though unfortunately, his condition is going to be very, very volatile to coming back quicker with just the slightest amount of stress. So when you're looking at the idea of, all right, you've slowly primed the motor, you've gotten the glycogen synthase enzyme, you get the lactic acid shuffle, all of that is a hormone. Hormones' only job in the body is to communicate. That's it.
Okay.
You start doing a warm up, you're sending a hormonal message that says, hey boys, we're about to do some work. Everything starts to vasodilate, lactic acid shuffle start. So this is why when you warm up, it's a lot easier to go fast. That's why I said earlier, if we do 6 intervals and you get out of your truck and you just immediately do your first interval, your 4th, 5th, and 6th will always be faster than 1, 2, 3 because of the metabolic warm up. Well, why use like a sprint race? Let's say you're doing an amateur race at 6 laps. Why don't you use 4 of those to get up to speed?
Yeah.
And then we hear the same excuse. Well, I ran out of time. No, dude, you weren't warmed up.
Right.
Now you go, the race is over. You brought the heart rate extremely high. You've got all this oxidative stress, production of free radicals. Well, those, when they stay residual in the muscle, creates excessive soreness. Because if you think, for those of you that are watching this on YouTube, imagine my fingers intertwined together as muscle fiber. And when you put it under load, it separates. And then when you eat amino acids, it fills those holes and the muscles get bigger and they get stronger, more contractile strength. So when you're bringing the heart rate down slowly, you're flushing all that metabolic waste out so it doesn't reside in the belly of the tissue. Because think about it, if you're so sore that you can't brush your teeth tomorrow, you're probably not going to do much in regards to starting to, because remember, we said the cool down is part of the recovery. This is what I mean by it. You're reducing the amount of residual fatigue, the soreness, so that you can go back to
Be recovered
like
quicker.
swim or doing a light bike ride or jump on the motorcycle and do a turn track.
Right. Okay. So that is a huge part of, and I mean, I don't know personally growing up, I didn't know anybody who really did that well. So that's something
There still isn't to this day. There still isn't.
should be added to because a lot of people are really worked or tired and they would probably think more work would be, I would think,
Well, and you brought up one of the factory riders. So you brought up Jett. So let's keep it relevant. Those 18 wheelers, if you've ever watched the pro races, right? When that fanfare is over, they're tearing shit down.
Yep.
Right. And when you go and you've seen some of the coverage at night where they show that they just have the lights on, the awning is down, everything is down. The only thing that's on are the outdoor lights. And there sits 2 isolated bikes with just a stand and 1 toolbox. Because when that award ceremony is over, that truck driver's hauling ass.
Yep.
He's putting the bike in and he's gone. So my point is, it's not like all that workout equipment is still sitting underneath the awning where they can just come back and cool down for an hour.
No, you really have to plan that out. Yeah. As a team or as a staff, as a rider, I'm sure that we don't see behind the scenes what all the guys are doing. It just happened to be, we saw it in that particular interview. I just, that was interesting. I always, back in the day when I grew up, I was a Bulls fan, Michael Jordan. And of course, Dennis Rodman was the freak athlete of the team, but he was always on that dang spin bicycle between halves. So, but, I just thought that was, because we've asked that on the show before. If you haven't watched the episodes, warm ups, how, because it is hard at Loretta's. You warm up and you go sit at a gate. So obviously Rodman's feeling was obvious, outwardly looking in. Well, I'm going to warm up, I'm going to play, but I'm never going to get cold. I'm going to stay warm. And that was his kind of approach. Granted, he was a rare human. So,
but it also reduces your risk of injury because your heart is the only organ that your body cares about. Therefore, all the blood will centralize around it.
Right.
And then all of a sudden you're sitting on the bench, your heart rate's low, your core body temperatures come down 10 degrees, not your temperature itself, but within the muscles, your core temperature should stay the same, of course. But the idea here is, all of a sudden you jump up and you make that first explosive move, or you pivot on a basketball court or on the motorcycle, you're sitting on the starting grid, your heart's going to the blood's going to centralize around the heart, even if it's 100 degrees Fahrenheit outdoors. The problem is then a gate drops, you go from a heart rate of 60 to 160. The muscles, the blood isn't into the extremities. So you really increase the risk of a muscle tear or a tendon or ligament tear. So it's a compounding problem for sure. But the other thing too is, and we've talked about this previously, but it's worth reiterating again, go look at the starting line of an outdoor national or supercross for that matter. Roczen, Hunter, Jett, Max Anstey, all the Europeans, their mechanics are sitting at the gate holding the bike. They're back behind the bike doing jumping jacks, burpees, walking lunges, because the Europeans don't care how dumb it looks. They know the physiological benefit. Watch the MXGPs. A hell of a lot more dudes off the bike doing jumping jacks behind.
staying warm.
They're
There
moving.
you go. Right.
But the Europeans in this area kind of have a school because they don't care about how goofy it looks. And that's where our egos get involved as an American. Not that I'm anti-American, but you can literally just see
Yeah,
it.
we have seen weird oddities, right? Yeah, I had actually another physiological one, which ties into what you said about Loretta's, which is the ice baths type thing. So I follow whatever science I can, talk cold plunges and the hot saunas and this, that, the other. And you want to laugh. If you live in Texas, you want a sauna, or you live in Florida and you live in a sauna in the summer, just go sit in your car midday. You don't have to spend any money, right? But
Exactly.
when and why for ice bath, and why not if there's not functional?
Well, it's like anything. High intensity interval training. You've heard me publicly say, we've said it here. I'm not a big advocate for it because I think most people are exhausted before they even start a high intensity interval workout. So therefore, I'm not a fan of it because I would rather see people get rested, fed, and hydrated, then go do it. Because I can sit here with a textbook and explain to you the benefits of high intensity interval training, production of testosterone, blah, blah. I get it from a textbook standpoint, but you have to put it in context. If you're somebody who's going through a divorce, in a bad relationship, work for a jerk and you have too much month at the end of the money, you're probably not a good candidate for high intensity interval training. When I was an athlete at the Olympic Training Center, they let us do speed work per discipline 1 day per week. So you have swim, bike, and run. So that's 3 workouts. We were only allowed 1 hard workout per week. And we were only allowed to do that if our biometrics validated that we had recovered enough to do that workout.
Our podcast with Tony Alessi really touched on this, and he said a lot without saying a lot, which was they did a lot of low intensity work.
Yes, but
fill in there. What do you call that? Fill in their robot cakes. Yeah, he said build that bucket up or base, or
build up base. So where the cold plunges have gotten taken out of context is when you look at the science, right? I hear this all the time. The science behind the cold bath, it activates brown fat, and it does. You're exactly right. You're exactly right. If that's all you're doing. But if you're somebody that's trying to bring your core body temperature down in between motos, it's the stupidest thing you could ever do. And I'm using the word stupid from a textbook knowledge, like lack of knowledge, you're stupid.
Right.
See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
When you're driving during the winter and your car goes off the road and you puncture a lake and your car is submerged, what's the first responder's number one concern about you? Hypothermia, right? What people don't realize is your human body is so well designed, it's immediately trying to warm up the body of water that you're sitting in. Well, obviously, if you're in a lake, you're going to lose that battle quite quickly because of the volume of water. This little human body's in there trying to heat up, let's say, a 5-acre lake. You're going to lose within minutes. Well, then why would you show me the difference between falling into a lake in an automobile during the winter with a frozen lake versus submitting yourself in an ice bath up to your neck when your heart rate was at 160, your core body temperature is up, and you're going to shell shock the system. That's why I go back to the motor. Pull that motor out after a moto and throw it.
It's not good.
Bath. Well, you're gonna crack the casings.
So you think there is a place for ice baths? Let's just say not
in between motos,
but there is in motos.
At the end of the day, when all of your work is done, because at this point you're using the ice bath. Now, some people, and there'll be some comments here, and I get it. Please leave comments. We love them. You'll talk to some people who do a cold bath in the morning because they say it gives. I've got a client, Nick, phenomenal guy out of the Tennessee area. You give him a cold plunge in the morning, that dude is like an Energizer bunny. Like you better get out of his way. He is going to make stuff happen, particularly when he's on the track. For some people like myself, you give me a cold plunge because it makes me somewhat physically exhausted because I start shivering quite quickly. Well, then I'm ready to go to bed because I've kind of have that exhausted feeling. Now, the benefits of the vasoconstriction and all that goes with it, yeah, you can Google what are the benefits of ice bath, and I will tell you that they're all 100% correct. I'm just going to ask you to go a little bit broader and put everything into context. Anything in extreme on a body that's already exhausted it's going to have a negative effect. And then if you're trying to do things in between motos, I want you to imagine falling into a frozen lake, coming out, and then wondering why you can't perform better. So the first responders pull you out of that lake and they say, hey, here's some running shoes. Now go run around that lake you just fell in. That would seem like the dumbest thing in the world.
Yeah.
I in athletic world.
You think there's the research that I've kind of vaguely looked at is maybe you get let's say you have a high impact sport, motocross, you get a lot of bruises, bumps, injuries, whatever, right?
Yep.
It kind of sort of can maybe help you be ready to go next weekend a little bit quicker, but the long-term effects on your body maybe are actually worse. So like I was reading about like the RICE, rest, ice, compression, whatever. Yeah.
Yep.
they've done some studies on sprained ankles, and they're starting to see that if you're an athlete, you need to play tomorrow, this, that, the other, it can really help with that. But for the long-term durability, maybe the data is suggesting that natural healing process, which is it gets inflamed and blah, 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 your long-term likelihood of re-spraining that ankle might decrease. So that's just, I'm just citing one study that I read. I'm not saying that's the answer. So is the same kind of true of the ice bath thing where like, okay, if you're a certain type of athlete in a certain type of situation, there's probably some weekly benefit. Let's say you're a pro because you got to race every weekend. I'm just making this up.
No,
Versus an amateur, hey, your race schedule isn't every single weekend at a big event. So maybe this isn't the way to go. That's kind of what I'm asking on that front. Because, it's all the rage with a lot of people right now.
oh, absolutely. Right now it's keto and it's HIIT training and it's cold plunges and in the not solar, but what's the word I'm looking for? Not heat therapy.
Red light or
Saunas.
yeah, saunas. Yeah.
Everybody's getting saunas or putting them in their house and stuff. If you're a parent, please listen to the question that Derek just asked because it's brilliant. If you've got to recover in the next 24 hours, an ice bath is going to be helpful from a physiological standpoint. I'm adopted into a family of 8. My brothers thought it was cool to take a pitcher of cold water, and when I was in the shower, they'd throw it over it. So if you ask me to get into a cold plunge, we're probably going to get in a fist fight because that's the emotion that it pulls out of me. You can show me all the textbook documentation that you want. You put me in cold water and I'm going to come out like a bear. I'm going to be pissed. That's the emotion it evokes from me. My brothers used to pull my hair. To this day, pull my hair, probably coming around with the right hook. It's just my first response. So this is why, even though you made the question up and you thought it was hypothetical, it's Johnny on the spot. I mean, literally you hit the bullseye. What is it you're trying to accomplish? Because here's the thing. I want you to rephrase, and I'm asking the parents to rephrase it in their heads. Rephrase a cold plunge. You don't have to put 100 pounds of ice in there. If I take tepid cold water, and let's say I put it in a baby pool, I just take a water hose and I fill that baby pool up with tap water. And then I take another baby pool, and let's say that I put warm water in it, not scalding. I'm not trying to cook a lobster. The contrast temperature between lukewarm water and tap water that's cold, that contrast in temperature is going to get the same result. Now, there'll be somebody that will argue the colder, the better. Well, if it works for you, you put me in water other than tap water cold, we're going to have a fight on our hands. Because what it's done is my physiological reaction is going to supersede the physiological benefit because of emotional scars of that shit happening to me when I was a kid. Not a victim. I'm just warning you, don't throw cold water on me. We're probably going to get in a fight.
Right.
Right. It's to this day.
I think that the phenomena behind it for some people, obviously there's some textbook data, great, is the mental aspect. Like they believe that this is toughening them. And it I'm sure it is, right?
Hey, if you believe it, it's true.
Great. Yeah, exactly. Right.
So you could say wearing green boxers is, like Joe Shimoda will not wear anything except white gloves.
Right. We drop our helmets before we ride, right? So,
yeah. So if you believe it, like we always say in a sports psychology world, whether you think you can or you can't, you're right either way. Just choose the right way. When it comes to contrast therapy, or in this case, ice baths, when you're looking to bring your core body temperature down, you want to do it with the least amount of stress on the body. So it's very simple. Come off the track, get out of as much gear as you can legally, right? Then put hand towels around your neck because you have the big artery around your neck. Put washcloths around your wrists because this is where you dissipate a lot of heat. But right next to your pubic bone, you've got the femoral artery. Put a hand towel down there. Get in the shade so you're out of your gear, as much skin is exposed as possible, so the exothermic process, getting the internal heat out, is engaged. You've got the benefit of a heart rate monitor. Put air temperature water on those washcloths and sit underneath the fan.
Right.
Watch your heart rate. Gets down 10 or 15 beats. Take slightly cooler water, put it on your washcloths. Watch the heart rate come down. When you get back to within 5 to 10 beats of your normal resting heart rate, then you can use cold, not ice cold, because if it takes your breath away, that's too much.
Right.
Now you're using so-called cold water. You get the fan blowing over there. So now you've got that process working for you, just like your radiator. And what you've done is you've brought the core body temperature down as quickly and as safely as possible, conserving energy. That's why I say that
the heart rate, right? The watch aspect is it's telling you a lot about where your body's at. And if you're with this, the heart rate's up. So,
Well, and what's funny is if you see somebody jump into a cold plunge, what do you think their heart rate does? Does it come down or stay up? It's going to stay up
right.
because it's stress on the system.
Stressing it. Right.
And this is why I say to my athletes at Loretta's, please don't go jump in there. I know you're hotter than heck. I know you just want to cool off. Have a baby pool that's just air temperature.
It's funny. I think you almost intuitively know this. Like, you get off the track, you're worked, you're hot, you get basically if you're smart, you want to get undressed, you want to cool off, but you're also not like, the best thing on the planet is for me to go jump in that freezing water. You're almost like, I want to take, that, right? But then the flip side, you might get,
oh, what's your option, right? You're either going to sit there and get smoked or go jump in the river, of course, but take it a step further. And I'm going to give a little bit, one of my secrets away at Loretta's. Our athletes do not go on that river all week long. We don't even sit in it. You got to remember, deer are, they're going to the restroom. Rain is bringing feces down into that water. Now you're sitting in, you've worked 8 months to get to Loretta's. This is the last 10 days. Now you're at Sunday night, you have practice starting tomorrow, and you're jumping in and out of the river, ingesting something in your nose, your ears, your mouth, that then becomes a viral infection that you just literally, I'm not going to say wasted the year because you still have the enjoyment of racing, which I love the process. But dadgum, we got to Monday of race week, and now you've got a virus?
I'm joking, but that's my favorite part about Loretta's, coach. I like to go sit in the river.
Well, here's the key.
I'm just joking about, I'm racing. I agree with you.
Well, but here's where you have to choose your friends safely, right? The reason why I say stay out of the river is because what if kids are having fun and they're splashing and you end up ingesting it?
Yeah.
And I've had people that say, oh my gosh, that is just overkill. You're taking the fun out. No. I'm not taking the fun out. I'm just trying to preserve the speed and the fitness and the bike balance.
Well, what are you there to accomplish too, right? You're there to have fun. Sure. Get in the road for it. There to race. Well,
well, all you've got to do is talk to somebody who's had a great year, thought they were going to podium at Loretta's, and they get sick on Monday. And you go, well, this was avoidable because, and we talked a lot about this, it takes 6 months to build an aerobic engine. So all these facilities that are just doing nothing but speed work on top of speed work on top of speed work, and they do it all the way till June, and then they give themselves 6 weeks to try to build an aerobic engine, long motos.
Yeah.
You're doing the exact opposite of what you should do. Instead of preserving energy coming in, you're overworking an already tired body because you've gone from essentially mini-O's in November. It's now June. You've gotten through your areas and regionals. So instead of getting into peak form, you're leaving your best performance out during the week. And these facilities are guilty of it. Sorry. If you own a facility,
said that, it's like, Dad, take Rotor so good during the week before Loretta's. Yeah, he did. That's where he rode his best.
That's where he best. That it all got left back there on the, and this is where we've had such success at Loretta's because I hate to say this, but I have a demented sense of humor. My athletes are doing maybe 4 to 5 hours total work time on and off the bike the 2 weeks before Loretta's. And I see these guys boasting about, yeah, we got 6 40-minute motos in today. And I just, yes, awesome. Keep doing it, dude. Because you're more talented than my guy, but you're going to come in so exhausted. My guy's going to run circles around you. And exactly, mom and dad are going to be like, what happened? Now, I'm going to be a real jerk here, Derek. People may unsubscribe for my comment, but I'm willing to take the risk. Because the parents don't know better, they put their money and trust in trainers, facilities, a combination of both. The kids get run into the ground. Who do they blame? Derek. Bike's not good. Didn't run right. I don't know why my kid's tired. It's everybody else's fault. Now, again,
The kid's not going to take, most of these kids, right? Especially, I see it all the time. If the parent makes excuses all the time, the kid will become an excuse maker too.
Well, and you have no idea how this is the bane of my existence, right? And this is why we're very big on when somebody comes to our program, we want to know how many facilities have you burnt through in the last year? How many motor builders have you burnt through? Because you're the family that just blames everybody. When your rider never gets arm pumped, and then we go to a big national and he or she gets a good start and goes backwards, who do they blame? Robb's program doesn't work. We're going backwards. We're getting tired. And then the rider's pretty smart. Oh, I got tired. What a great answer.
Yeah.
I just got arm pumped. What a great answer. It's funny. You're doing 20 to 30 hours a week for the last 8 months. Never complained of being tired. I had you do a 14-day taper. So I know you didn't come in here tired, and the parents will blame me. And then they have the audacity to go, hey, why is my athlete this is 2 years later. Why is my athlete tired? Well, please hold on, Derek, for 90 seconds. Let me say this whole thing. And if it offends somebody, I apologize, but own it. When you complain to me that your athlete's tired, either A, he or she is not in shape, or B, he or she is not willing to do the work. You can't have it both ways. You can't tell me an athlete's overworked when you look at their activity board on Garmin and they're not putting in the work. So don't blame me that your athlete's overworked. But then when I show you that your athlete's not doing the work, they're not in shape because they're not willing to do the work. Stop blaming everybody under the sun. Quit asking me the same questions for 6 years straight. You know the answer, but you refuse to take responsibility for it, parent. And because of that, as you just said, Derek, now the rider, it's everyone else's fault.
She likes all the time. I get a call all the time about there has to be some secret out there.
Yeah.
Maybe there is, but I don't know it because we've won with what we got, and we've had, you name it, come through the shop. You name the company, it has come through here, and it's been on the dyno, and we've had various clients from all over, and some get it, in my opinion, which means that they're very analytical. They're like the Adam C. dad, Alan C. They basically say, well, we bought 5 different motors from 5 different builders and we tried all 5 and, they're all pretty this, that, the other, whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
And we bought all 5 from all the places that everybody else says is the magic, and none of them was the magic, meaning it's not why my kid's winning or losing. And these are the dads that get it, right? They say, all right,
let me say this and I know it's going to sound arrogant, and I apologize, particularly if this is your first time listening. At the time of this recording, I have 314 amateur number 1 plates. I know my process and system works. I don't put in the sweat equity. The rider does. I just try to direct their effort, right? So you can't tell me now, if you're convinced that your snowflake child is the only one in my program that can't make it work, instead of taking responsibility for the work that he or she's not willing to do, then you, the parent, need to own that. I'm not your cup of tea. Never will be, because I'm going to hold you accountable. That's what I love about the Garmin. We both are looking at the same dashboard. I don't wear the watch. Your rider does. But where I do lose my temper is you have the audacity to blame a process in a system that has multiple upon multiple number 1. We have 4 AMA number 1 pro plates. We have 314 amateur championships. But your little snowflake is the only one who can't make this process work. Because here's where I'm going to put you into the conversation. I've had athletes, unfortunately, that don't have big budgets. Mom and dad work their tail end off to keep these kids, and the best they can do is an absolutely stock motor, and they're willing to get a little bit of internals done on the shock and the forks because that's all they can afford, and they've won championships.
100%.
So don't tell me, because I know for a fact this family is running an absolutely stock bike with a little bit of work done on the suspension, which they could barely afford to do. And
I see it all the time.
He rides
I tell people all the time
out of that bike.
Yeah, I tell people all the time that we've had back in the day various clients, and they're all varied types, and some are great, but they also know they're great, meaning they practice and race around local areas on stock bikes.
Yes.
They might have a little suspension done or this or that, but they're stock, and they'll go win local races and regional races and things like that on stock equipment. And then if you we've had great clients who have promoted for us with our stickers on those bikes and said, oh yeah, if somebody comes up at that race and says, oh man, that motor sounds good, who do you use? Call up HP.
Yes.
That guy calls you up and says, hey man, I want just what I saw so-and-so on this past weekend. You're like, no, you don't.
It's at your dealership.
Yeah, you already owned it. Don't own it. You screwed it up. So
exactly.
But you can't, they don't believe that. And so it's just, it's a shame.
But here's the catch though, Derek. The ones that go out and win on a stock motor with a little bit of suspension work, you look at their activity board on Garmin.
Yeah.
If I ask them to stand on their head on Wednesdays at 4, rub their head, sing Kumbaya, and drink green tea, every Wednesday at 4 p.m., they're going to be doing it. And I never have to ask them twice. And to me, that's where I want the parents to step back. What are you raising? A champion or a habitual complainer? No one's going to win every race. Get that through your head.
Current example of that is the Juju kid.
Oh,
so wasn't a storied amateur. I mean, it's good. It's good, but not like this Adam Cincerillo amateur. And realistically, I mean, I know the dad's pretty sharp from what I heard, and it kind of has his own hand on their equipment back in the day, kind of working on their own motors and stuff. But the reality was, I don't think they have the best bikes on track as an amateur by any stretch. But I think the dad's smart enough to understand equipment, and the kid clearly is an awesome pro now. I think that made him a great pro. The fact of the matter is that he worked hard at whatever it is that they've done, and then additionally, it's not about the bike. It's not about this. It's not about that. I mean, last year when Sexton's having all these KTM woes and KTM's a piece of crap talking to, you should see the group chats I have. It's just hilarious. Like, I see that bike out there. It's exactly what I felt on mine. I'm like, dude, it's not the same bike. Like, get over yourself. Don't ride that fast, number 1, and number 2. It's not the same motorcycle. But that said, you didn't hear Juju bitching about it last year. I didn't hear one bitch.
Nope. But think about Juju. Grew up as, was he 5-time jet ski world champion?
Yeah, he knows how to win.
And on Wednesday before the races, he's doing barrel racing on a horse. Tremendous amount of balance that's required. Very, and this is where I hope the parents will take what we're trying to put together in this podcast is play the long game. We're going to have Daniel Blair from Supercross U is going to come on, and he's not going to sell his services and promote. But as I've been putting in social media, right, Juju and Cole Davies both were handpicked by Daniel Blair. Neither one of them. I mean, obviously Cole comes from underneath the tutelage of Ben Townley over in New Zealand, which is awesome. Ben's a legend in his own, right? But the idea is not the Jett Reynolds and Ryder D amateurs with literally hundreds of thousands of dollars a year being put into that rider, playing the long game. Like I say, Juju didn't say much.
Great athlete, right? And probably just a great overall athlete.
And he's changed his program up. He looks like a man child now, like we said earlier. He's got the big square forehead, and he looks like he's doing some interesting things. But the bottom line is when you look at his amateur career, I don't know who is in this where I would challenge the parents. Who do you want? Do you want somebody that dominated as an amateur and is kind of fizzled away? And Lord knows, Derek, you've seen quite a few of those because they didn't get ready. I mean, when you go pro, that's when it should really get good and fun. But unfortunately, most of them are like burnout mentally and physically. They're jaded with the whole process and the system. And that's where I love the fact that you've been willing to, you know, for the shows that we've put together up to and including today, the idea here is, hey, when your son or daughter is not having fun anymore, why don't you just go take a break and go ride in the woods? Or why don't you go out in the sand dunes? Or
he should
get jet ski. Oh my!
He should ask you to ride. You know, that's obviously why Juju's in it. He had options in other things, was very good at other things, and he loves dirt bikes. And it's probably against his dad's best wishes, right? So,
yeah. Well, look at Aaron Gwynn. A lot of people don't realize this. Aaron Gwynn, multi-time downhill world mountain bike champion. A lot of people don't realize he gives credit to riding moto when he was young to be able to learn a track quickly. He goes to these, you know, because if you guys know downhill, you've got to walk it. You're not allowed to ride it. You've got to walk it. He puts it in his brain, and he'd go full send on his first run. And you're talking rock gardens that are
and
50 yards long.
Literally insane in my opinion.
Yeah, it's just, I don't even know how do you get the kahunas to even try that? Well, Aaron Gwynn gives credit to this. I look at the jet ski and the balance and the, you know, doing the barrels with the horses, that center of gravity. It's Jett taking a dance class, knowing how to be able to finesse and find that sweet spot of center, as you referred to earlier. But I go back to the Deegan's doing the gypsy tails when I loved, and we've talked about this as well, when Chase asked him, do you think you've done it the right way? They were talking about the idea that Star's got a different program than, you know, we've talked about this idea of facility training like Alden Baker, where you've got racer competition all week, to Ricky James, Chad, and now Tomac, that only rides by himself. Both have won championships. How do you say one's right or wrong? And I love what Brian Deegan said. He said, we did everything. We rode skateboards, pit bikes, pump bikes. We did backflips. We did freestyle. We did moto. He says, I hope we did the right thing, but only time will tell. Because as you said earlier, everybody's calling you saying, hey, what's the trick? Where's the magic elixir? It's finding what works for you. And that's what we specialize in. Our weight workouts change every 6 weeks to avoid muscle stagnation. Well, that's the science of avoiding muscle stagnation. When you look at our nutrition and our sports psychology program, is to avoid mental and physical burnout. We know what to do to balance load to avoid adrenal fatigue. That's our wheelhouse. Yes, we're going to get you all the knowledge you need to not make that mistake. But here's the key. You have to do the work.
There's no substitute for it, right?
There is no substitute, and the willingness to learn.
Right. You had said something earlier, and I just anecdotally, but it was about your interval recovery.
Yeah.
And to me, that's your sign of peak. I don't know if this is true or not. You know, for me, when I got to really fit, that was like the telltale sign that, hey, I'm pretty damn fit right now, which was how many times can I do that? And how quickly do I recover? You know,
how quickly you recover is the key right there.
Right. So you know, if you're able to go into the red zone multiple times and you're back instantly, able to go back to your, you know, threshold, hey, you're in a pretty damn good fit spot. But if you're really untrained and not fit, if you didn't put in the work, then you go into that threshold and yeah, you've got maybe that peak a little bit that one time, but you can't get back and it's a longer recovery. You know what I mean? You're just fall off the wagon. And I think that's what happens to most of these kids in motocross, myself. Every kid who's raced hard can push themselves to their peaks. That's not their problem. It's the full blown put in the work side? Can you recover from peak?
You bring up something that's extremely important for the parents to understand. And if particularly for the parents, if you grew up as an athlete, ask yourself, is your rider a sprinter or are they more of a late moto type of person? And again, please don't get hung up. Don't stop listening. Please stick with me again for another 90 seconds. Derek, if we use what you just said, if you're doing interval sets and you can get into those upper heart rate zones and recover quickly, you have what we call a big lactate tolerance or an anaerobic threshold. You can handle high levels of lactate production. Remember, what's lactate? A byproduct of converting stored sugar, glycogen, into energy. Simple, just like exhaust out the back of your bike. So if you're able to go into those red zones, come back and recover quickly, you have a high lactate tolerance. If you're somebody who you get your heart rate up and you feel like you're going to vomit, you have a low lactate tolerance. Well, here's the interesting part. With our athletes, we make sure that they've got a strong lactate tolerance, generically referred to it as sprint speed. We have a formula to build sprint speed, but we do it without ruining your late race endurance. So now you can sprint and you can finish the race stronger than you started. So when you look at the idea of like when we do our assessments, we do them every 6 weeks around racing, of course. We look at strength, we look at muscular endurance, and we look at lactate tolerance because you're going to need all three. That's generically referred to them as energy systems. You're going to need all three to be good. You're going to have to sprint. And by the way, when you stall the bike or you put the bike down and you pick it up, you've gone anaerobic. So if you're already at 98% of your maximum and you stall or put the bike down, when you pick the bike up, you've already crossed the anaerobic threshold. You can only go one direction, and that's backwards. So when I ask you to, and I've been on public record of saying my athletes race at about 82 to 85% of maximum. People go, oh, there's no way. I go back to, what would you rather race, a 450 or a 65 in a drag race? Oh, it takes 450. Okay. Well, you have to build a strong enough motor strength with enough aerobic engine, carburetor, to be able to get rid of the lactic acid, your exhaust pipe, to go fast. And your 80%, 85% is everyone else's 95 to 100.
And we're seeing that at the pro level.
Exactly.
The elite guys now are able to race at this insane pace, the strongest they've ever been late into the races.
Yep. No weaknesses. That's what I'm trying to get
no
parents to understand.
They do everything.
They can sprint. They can late race surge. They can do 320s. They can do whatever's required of them.
I mean, think about
at your reverse
90s or in the Carmichael era. If he had super motocross, maybe Carmichael would. I don't know. But like the fact that they can effortlessly now go do 220s for a supercross type event. Yep, no problem. We got it. In Texas, it was close to 100.
Yep.
Yeah, no problem. We got it. Well, that's just how resilient these athletes are nowadays, right?
You're talking about the older athletes. Think about this. How many stories have we read about Bob Hanner riding until he ran out of gas? Many, many times. And that's when you had reserves on the bikes, right?
Right.
I work currently with an MXGP rider, and his riding coach is a 5-time world champion. Okay. And this 5-time world champion, his favorite workout is 6 40-minute motos.
Wow.
And they do 40 minutes of work to 20 minutes of rest. And you try to get all 6 of them. And the goal is to have less than a 5-second deviation from the first to the last set.
Well, that's what I think. We've talked about this. This is what our podcast is about. I think it's fundamentally what's wrong with American motocross right now. A lack of knowledge in these areas.
Yes.
And flat out, our amateur system is not grooming pros. It's grooming amateur racers. And so, Loretta's longest moto being the pro class, now 25 minutes. That's just a recently, but it was formerly 20 minutes, essentially.
Yep.
That's about half of the pro moto.
Exactly. Well,
and that's this race of the year for any amateur.
And it's vocal about it. Who have a disdain for that?
Lawrence.
Exactly. Dazzy threatened to take Jett back to Europe. He said, this amateur system is broken. This isn't setting my son up to go pro. And if you don't make changes, I'm going to pack up and go. Now, it wasn't an idle threat, but I do think it's interesting because he's Australian. He's not under the political thumb that a lot of the families are here. But I just think it's a very powerful statement. Somebody that we're watching who, think about it, didn't come in here and spend 12 years in our amateur system.
Right.
At 19 years old, has won every championship that you can win at 19.
Well, that just tells you something's wrong with our system. You can't have a rider D who's a storied amateur go out and be Jett.
Yep.
And let's be honest, you really think fundamentally, I mean, maybe Jett is that talented. Maybe he's that much more talented. But fundamentally, I think between a Chase, a Tomac, a rider D, Jett, a Kinney, we go back to Dungey, go back to RV, they're all very close in my opinion of talent. So it was all the things you stacked on top of the talent that made them who they were. And so, to my opinion, Ryder D, for example, being a storied amateur that he was, here's a guy who maybe with a little bit more of not the correct, more of the mindset that the Lawrences took earlier on, you would have had more pro success earlier on. I'm not saying he's bad. He's getting better. He looks
Exactly.
here, right? He's really close. Like, he's clearly close. But the point is, they conquered the U.S. amateur system, just like the Cincerellos did, right? But the reality is the Lawrences always had the long game of conquering the pro system. And so, like you said, hey, this 20 little minute moto is not really preparing us for pro. What are we doing? And that's kind of and that's, like I said, that's the longest race of the year. You go to Minios, you go to Spring National. They don't run that. So
No.
and it's a money thing, right?
What's Dazzy's been on? Dazzy? Oh yeah, it's definitely. I mean, when you and I were growing up, you had four races on the track. You had an 80 class, not 85. You had an 80 class, 125, a 250, an open, and if you had pros, you might have a pro race. So you know, practice started at 9 a.m. and you were done by 1 o'clock in the afternoon.
We see it now with vet classes, right? It drives me nuts because if I ever race again, I'll be a vet rider. It's like, just line all plus 25s up, all plus 35s up.
How many different ways can you pie
that way? So what? Go get better. I don't know what to tell you, dude.
How many different ways can you slice an 85?
Well, it's the same amount of entries. That's the part I don't get, right? Now they've added classes, meaning like, okay, 85 this, 85 that, 85 this, 585 classes at a local race.
It's absurd. Well, what I was going to say just a few minutes ago is think about how public Tazzy has been. Every mistake we made with Hunter, we didn't let Jett do it, and the results are history. And that's what motivates us to do this type of a podcast. This is what motivates me as a human performance company is, yes, there's a time to work. You have to work with the right intensity. That's why we use heart rate monitor. There's ways that you can very easily manage, rather evaluate whether you recovered or not. And that's what aggravates me. And again, I'm not throwing any one facility under the bus, but just the whole facility model is, and man, if I had $1 for every riding coach that I've talked to at facilities over the last 40 years, they say the same thing. Don't you tell me what to do on the bike. I'm not telling you what to do on the bike. I'm sharing with you the athlete's dashboard. They're effing exhausted, dude.
Yeah, like I'm not telling you exactly. You need to look at your athlete.
Well, but here's the genesis behind the conversation. Hey, you're my rider, Derek, and you're working with a famous riding coach. Your riding coach says, I need to talk to your coach. So we get a 3-way call going. If you're young enough, I'll bring your parents on the call as well, right? So we're all looking at your Garmin dashboard. And on the little left-hand side, there's a thing called activities. We click on it. It shows me every session you did on the motorcycle, every session you've done off the motorcycle. Well, for the last 12 weeks, you've done 0 cross-training because I look at your dashboard and I go, hey, dude, based on what you guys did today, you need to go float in a pool, eat a ton of food, try to get to bed early so you'll be ready for tomorrow. We've done that now for 8 weeks, 12 weeks.
Right.
Well, the riding coach has the audacity because you are effing exhausted. I want to talk to your coach. So I get on the phone and you're an ex-factory rider and you're going to talk to me. Talk to me. But before you open your mouth, I want you to look at 4 variables. We go and we look at HRV. We look at resting heart rate. We look at sleep score. We look at calorie burn rate. And this guy's just running his mouth. He's got to do some off the bike work. He's not fast. He's getting tired. But I said, listen to what you're saying. Ex-pro. My rider has not done 1 hour, not 1 minute off the bike because he's already effing exhausted. Look at the calorie burn rate, 6,300 calories. You have him at the track for 4 hours. He's got to go to school. He's got to work on his bikes. And you're telling me not to tell you what to do on the bike when you're calling me, telling me that my athlete needs to do more work when the athlete's already smoked and he's performed poorly at Loretta's, and now you want to blame his fitness program when we haven't done anything off the bike. All I've tried to do is get him to recover from the work you've done on the bike.
Well, and a lot of these guys don't, maybe they were X Factory, not like, go look at what Chase, Kenny, Jett, they don't ride that much anymore. They really don't. And so to me, people don't grasp at it. They're not pounding as much time. If they're racing Supercross mid-season, they might be doing 220s. Maybe. It probably isn't even that length, right? And so they're just keeping their comfortability up. Maybe they're testing a little bit. They're not trying to pound their body into the ground. And that's what I don't think a lot of people get. They can afford to go to the gym or this, that, the other, because they're not killing themselves on the motorcycle.
Exactly.
And there's times where they are, right? There's other parts of the year where, okay, we need some seat time. All right, let's get that in, right? So,
well, that's what makes it such an interesting conversation. And that's why, I really appreciate you being willing to do this podcast together, because no, It's not all fitness. No, it's not all mental. No, it's not all suspension. No, it's not all tire selection. No, it's not all motor. It's a lot of moving parts. And as we've articulated in today's show, it's a lot of moving parts. And my question is, if you're not getting the results, how long are you going to continue to not get good results before you try to find the source of the problem to start getting good results? If it's always the blame game, you're going to continue to stay in the blame game.
Yeah.
And like you said, what is it that Dazzy says? We just take it apart. You've said that with almost every one of the riders, right? They're meticulous about trying to figure out I think you said it was Chase and his dad. They want to take it apart. They want to, what is my big thing? You got to know why you're doing what you're doing, both on and off the motorcycle, from a physiological standpoint to ensure incremental improvement. Now, I don't want that
and
to
that's
sound
true on the
stodgy.
bike, right?
Yeah.
So, okay, look at Tomac's setup, and that's influenced the Lawrences and everybody's getting
Yep.
it's heading this way. Kenny, I think, might have even been first. I don't know. But
Well,
they run a taller rear, and
mhm.
but where does that come from? Well, part of it has come from they want to keep their feet up and they don't want to put their foot out. And there's a lot of reasons for that. You know, there's a lot of okay, that's the technique. Maybe that's not for you. That's not for everybody. That's what they wanted to work on. Was a byproduct of that. Oh, hey, I don't have as much weight in the front tire. I need more weight on the front. Essentially, what happens when you scoot forward and you put your foot out and you put your head forward, the rear of the bike gets taller.
Exactly.
Well, if I'm going to sit further back, have my feet on the pegs and blah, 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 well, then I need to actually, when I measure the sag, have the bike be taller, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's a bike, but then I guarantee you in that testing process, oh, well, there's some negatives. The front did this and this and that, the other. Every little thing comes about. So you dissect that process. Okay, this needs to change, that needs to change. And then you have to look at it holistically. I had to make all these changes to this motorcycle that did work okay to allow me to keep my feet up. And I had to make, is it better or is it not? And if you don't analyze that, you don't talk about it, you don't look at the lap times, you don't look at the results, you don't look at the likelihood of crashing. Okay, am I crashing more? Am I crashing less? All of these factors, you don't really know what you're doing. And I think that's, I don't know how to put it. I don't know how to tell it to people. It's like the people who win championships at our sport don't luck into that.
That's right.
And, you know, you're James. Okay, you were just unbelievably gifted, right? But for a little period there, you had a really healthy run. You had a full season. You know, all the things you needed to do to go win those championships. It wasn't a mistake. And then nowadays, I think, unfortunately or fortunately for us as fans, it's great. It's more than ever, right? You got to piece every piece of your program together, and that starts on the bike, that starts off the bike, that starts.
And it starts early. Starts early. And an 85 is not too young to start becoming a student. Like you said, when you get to 15 years old, you've got to assume that at 16 you can go communicate with Bones Bacon at PC and be able to articulate what you want the bike
Well,
to
and
do.
a guy like that or at Star, if Deegan couldn't, and he's unhappy with his bike, they're just going to say, well, I don't know what to tell you, but it's your fault.
I can't help you. That's what they're going to say
to me, right? If you're willing to talk to me and come up with some words that are functional, they don't have to be perfect words. They just have to be functional. We can make this better. But if you're not able to communicate, sorry, go find a team that will take that. And some will, some won't. But you see that too, right? I mean, like I said, I think Chase has learned the hard way. And I guarantee you by the end of this stint, by the end of this year, he would be one of the best individuals you could hire to develop a bike.
Yep.
Because he's older. He's learned a lot. He's been around the wagon now at great factories, and he's seen different staffs, and then he's seen a whole plethora of parts and pieces and things that they've thrown at it. So now the whole picture's there for him, and his communication skills have had to improve because ultimately KTM wants to give him what he wants.
Absolutely.
They just don't know how to do it. I think they're there now, right?
Maybe we can close with this question here. Who is KTM's test rider? We know Trey does Honda. We know Brock does Cowie. Who is it? Marias?
I think he's a production side from what I understand. He's getting older. I've heard, I don't know if he's on the KTM side or not, but I've heard Hansen is still heavily involved over there now.
Okay. I was going to say, what about Marvin? Is he doing anything on the testing side?
Don't know. I don't think so. I think that from what I've heard, it's Hanny. He still rides Supercross, still rides the test tracks, rides for I think he rides all the bikes. That's kind of what I heard.
Well, and the reason why I asked that is hopefully to encourage the parents. When your racing career is over, like Brock Tickle's making good money being a test rider. Trey Kennard's career is over as a racer, making good money as a test rider.
If you're good at this.
So when you get good at articulating, when you get good at shaking something down, it opens yet another opportunity, whether it's broadcasting, because you can see it and articulate it, or whether you can see it and write it and convert it to an engineer that knows how to go and tweak. Like you said, why add a 1 millimeter to that rear linkage? You know it as an engineer. but can the rider tell him, I think it'd be better with a 1 millimeter
Go
rise?
look at Tony Alessi, go look at Andrew Short, had on our podcast. Still listen, both are great. I know for a fact that Shorty is incredibly knowledgeable about his bikes. He knows every piece in them. He knows how they work. He's worked on them. He's had technicians at his property working with him, showing him pieces. That's where Gilmore came from. That's Comac's current guy, right? So that's what Shorty knows every little bit about it. And we've had this conversation. I think he said it on the show, but if not, not everybody knows he had a very long career at the time frame, longer than most, because he was a lot of value to a team where not only can you go get a top 5, but he also can give feedback on the bike that these young guns weren't able to do.
Yes.
So you kind of hired him as a double duty guy, right? And so there's so much value in that. If you're a great communicator about the bike, you can look at Kyle Chisholm. Yeah, the guy's still incredible, makes main events. So we're talking about an incredible dirt bike rider.
Yep.
Especially at how old he is now. But that said, Kenny has him on that team because Kenny really likes his ability to help communicate on that motorcycle. I'm not saying it's only why. I'm just saying that kept him, an opportunity to go ride his dirt bike. And so that's an incredible skill set that he has in his back pocket. And let's be honest, if you're an aftermarket shop or factory connection or whatever, and Kyle Chisholm retires, you don't think you want to call his ass up and be like, hey, can you give me a little feedback on my bike? And so, and maybe, the keeper's getting older and whatnot. Maybe that's what Chisholm does after he retires, becomes a little test rider or something, So those are you're exactly right. Right. And then as a shop, I mean, I can't tell this to parents enough. If your kid's a good communicator and easy to work with, like just a good personality, a good person, I'm as a shop is elated to work with your kid.
Absolutely.
Hey man, what's this? What's that? Boom, 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 boom. I like working with this because I like success as much as you guys like success.
Absolutely.
Same with you. You like winning. I like winning.
Absolutely.
On the flip side of that, if they got a bad attitude, they're not easy to be around, they're not good communicators, well, then you're not going to get free time from me because I don't want to be around you.
Exactly.
So sorry, build the athlete that as a parent, if you don't like being around your kid at the races on race day, I want to be around your kid.
Amen to that.
You know what I mean?
Well,
real quick before you go.
Yeah.
What's new in the Coach Robb life right now? What do you got to share? I see some helmets in the background. Are those former Coach Robb helmets? Are those current helmets?
Yep. This is our wall of fame. I've actually got a couple more helmets that sit around the office here. This one is one of our downhill mountain bikers, Jordy Scott's helmet. This is our riding coach that is actually up at Waldo doing our winter program, Janie Hunkler. This is Aiden Dickens. Behind here, this is, I think this may be Isaac Teasdale's. So we've got some new gear that's coming out. We're very fortunate. We have a partnership with T-Dub who helps us out with all of our gear.
Did I see a drop on that on your Instagram?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So if people want to see it, look good. I thought it looked good.
Yeah. We're just trying to get more of a cohesive, for anybody who's been around us for a long period of time. You guys will remember the old Moto E logo. That's what you see up on this, that there. The reason why we had to get away from the Moto E originally stood for Moto Endurance. And so we did the E because obviously endurance is pretty hard to put on t-shirts and stuff. Well, when the e-bike world came around, everybody started thinking that we were an e-bike company.
Makes sense.
So that really caused us to have to do a very, very heavy pivot very quickly. So we'd always had Complete Racing Solutions. That's always been our website. So it was just one of those, we had Moto E as a name because what it was originally versus what the website world kind of developed for us, which was complete. Because I've always believed that your website needs to be what you do. So Complete Racing Solutions is exactly that: strength, nutrition, sports psychology, injury prevention, everything in between. So the ability, I've been trying for years to get a gear company to sublimate some CRS, Complete Racing Solutions gear, but the minimums were so big, it really wasn't cost effective. Got this partnership together with Todd Waters. He owns the Husqvarna off-road and motocross team in Australia.
Right.
So he does our gear for us. Fortunately, we get to work with his riders. Todd still races to this day. He was actually a good rider with Caroli, Australian outdoor national champion. So we get a chance to work with his Husqvarna riders, which is great. He's got an amateur development program that we've put together with him. So we have that. We have a new off-road race team that we're starting. with Anthony with a ride tune down in the Melbourne area of Australia. We have a 2-man off-road team that we'll be doing some public announcements with them. Those are probably our 2 newest things, but that's over on the Australia side. Our coaching certification, we've partnered with Steve Hatch.
Okay.
And Steve Hatch is going to be helping us out on some of underneath our coaching umbrella. We have 3 levels of coaching certification, a level 1, a level 2. Level 3 is going to be more the elite, and then we're going to have an additional, which is going to be what we consider our professional. So we're going to be raising the bar in regards to what does it mean to say you're a human performance coach? What does it mean to actually say you know how to ride a dirt bike? Steve Hatch is a legend for anybody who's been around the sport.
Yeah, if you don't know who he is, he's just unbelievable at off-road racing.
Unbelievable. And believe it or not, got to start racing in moto.
Okay.
And then moved his way over there after a tremendous career moto-wise. The biggest thing that we've been working on is the delivery platform. So we've got the platform selected, and we started onboarding all the classes. Over the last 2 years, we've been interviewing coaches. You've probably seen our ads where we say coaches needed. We have a dozen athletes all around, our coaches and athletes around the world, and we are going to be certifying them as a coach. And then we have a total of 27 CRS facilities around the world. So now what we're going to be able to do is start putting them in a job placement. So now you're educated both on and off the bike. Now you can go out and you can start helping these parents. Because like with Jamie Hunkler, who's there in Waldo for our winter program, what's great about Jamie is Jamie does know suspension. And so Jamie can help you set the bike up. Jamie knows off the bike how to look for recovery, metrics. He knows what to do to make sure that you're pushing hard enough, but not too hard. He looks at residual fatigue on a weekly basis. That's why you see the advertisements that we put out. Jamie's never had a pro card, but he's smarter than most riding coaches who have either worked as a factory rider or still has a pro card in racing.
Right.
That's where we get into the argument. There's a multitude of riding coaches that are out there, and there's some great ones. The Ben Riddles of the world, I love them to death. Like I said, Jamie Hunkler, Ben, there's so many good riding coaches that are out there, and I think you can learn from all of them. But as I put in working with our marketing department, that's not what's keeping you from winning championships. It's being mentally and physically burnt out. It's having no energy, not because your lack of fitness, but because you're essentially underfeeding yourself. You're not sleeping enough. The list goes on and on. That's what makes our riding coaches like a Jamie Hunkler so unique. Is yes, he's going to do what every other riding coach does on the bike, but he's going to help you do things that no other riding coaches can do. And that's our niche, right? So the coaching certification is big. Like I said, the new race team with Ride Tune in Australia, off-road team. We've got Todd Waters' motocross team in Australia. We are planning on doing some European trips this year. We've been asked to open some new facilities, ironically. In Iceland was one of them.
Oh, wow.
Spain is one of them. So, you put those on top of like being in the UK with Richard McEwen, who owns Desert Martin, which is awesome. Working with Sergio with the Cowie team in Spain, working with the Cap Moto team over there. So long answer to your short question, a lot of things going on behind the scenes, but we love it. I always say this will be our 40th year. It's the 40-year overnight success because a lot of these seeds were planted over a decade ago, and people don't realize it takes a lot to get those seeds watered, and couldn't be more thankful. But
how about you? I would say anything you're really, really excited about outside of moto, outside of your business, was something you're personally excited about next year.
Man, for this next year,
you gonna have a personal life?
Yeah, it's pretty funny. My schedule is pretty rigid, but if you looked at it, everything that I do personally is in red, and I make sure there's enough red in there. Like we get our workouts in every day, and I make sure I get 8 hours of sleep every night. So it's not the most. Like some people would look at it and say it's not a very fun life, but I love what I do. So to me, it is. It's my way of being fun. Probably the big thing is we're going to be starting to acquire some facilities. I'll announce it here. So the facility is going to be our new pretty big push as we move forward.
You're working towards.
Yeah, exactly. We've been very successful by putting coaches in place, but what we realize is we have to have a little bit more input on the process from A to Z, because when we make a promise to a family, we want to make sure that we can deliver on it. We need to make sure that the communication doesn't break down between what the parents expected,
right,
against what we offered. We always, because we're very big on every week we are big on looking at the results. What's the incremental improvement?
Nice.
So yeah. How about you? I'm still amazed by the 3D molds that you guys are doing. Is that still on the top of your priority?
Yeah, I've been working on that a lot. Not a moneymaker yet, but like, I made these. Made these. I don't know if you can see the HP in it or
Get
not.
covers, yeah.
So
Absolutely.
that's just a super simple product for Git already made this product, but it doesn't fit the new 85.
Okay.
So of course that's backwards. So now it does fit the new 85. Clicks in.
Is that coming out of a 3D printer?
Yeah. So it's out of a 3D printer, and this is a rubbery material. I've been playing around with materials. This is nothing new to people who do all that stuff, but for me,
Yeah,
commercially, the fact that you could buy a thing that can make that
it's amazing.
Unbelievable. Like,
Yep.
you know what that would cost to go get injection molded a few years ago? So,
Oh my gosh.
yeah. And of course, you mess up on your design. You're like, oh, I just injection molded, 20,000 of these pieces of crap. Yeah, that's just been playing around with that. And then, I don't know. I'm excited about, the new Cowie's out. I just like new things. It's not much different, but it's cool. And I have some projects that are, in progress with this, 4 ideas we've had with intakes and stuff like that. So I got some cool stuff coming for YouTube, I hope. I've been searching and trying to find a video editor to bring my visions to life, because it's not me. I'm not an editor and not a graphics guy. So hopefully that'll come to fruition. It's not a moneymaker, per se. We don't, people don't realize, but you could go have a 1 million view video on YouTube and let's call it a $5,000 profit, so it wouldn't be exactly. 1 million views, obviously would be a hell of a video, We've had a couple. I mean, I've had a couple over 100,000, which I'm shocked by, but so I've got some cool stuff, irons in the fire, that I think if you're interested in cool physics, but don't really want to learn the physics, that's our goal. Here's the physics. This is cool. Here's the facts. Here's the data. Here's the whatever. But I bet you didn't know why that was behind it. Here's a little bit of the why. So that's a goal. And then
later 25.
Yeah, we'll see what happens for the shop here. And I'm going to be I was supposed to go to A1. The fire scared me away. So didn't go, had it booked. So I'm going to probably try to go to Phoenix. So if you're in Phoenix, you see me or whatever, say hi. And then I'm actually really thinking about, I don't know what you're doing. I might go to Tampa because it's East, round 1. And we got a couple guys on some product we could maybe go help. So that'd be cool. So I don't know.
That at Daytona. What about Daytona? We tried that last year together.
Yeah, I'm probably down to do that again. I really
we got to get that Airbnb that got away from us last time. So if you're coming, I'll get it booked.
Okay, we'll figure it out, because I like Daytona, so that'd be good. And if so that's it. That's what's new. We're working on
congrats, man.
Side note, one little new product. We will have connecting rods this year. So that's something that we've been working really hard on. I have tie rods for 4 strokes, but I was like, that's a really niche market that I think is cool.
Yeah.
So I had already gone down that design process, finding manufacturing, all these things. And so we're going to I already have them. I don't think they're here, but some 2-stroke rods. So we're going to have the 85 KTM,
nice.
125 KTM YZ, 125 and 65. And we're going to have our own billet line of rods that'll be new for the year. So
very cool.
Little irons in the fire here and there, but
congratulations, man. Off to a new year and a lot of new opportunities. This is going to be great.
Yes, sir.
Well,
freeze there in Florida.
Yeah, it's
so cold.
Yeah, I had to actually get a jacket on. I'm not liking this, man. But no, seriously, Derek, thank you so much for another great show. Episode number 12 is a wrap, presented to you by HBI Auto. Just in closing, guys, again, thank you for the subscriptions. Thank you for the likes and the comments. Continue, like Derek always says, leave us your thoughts below. If you disagree with something that we said or you want a clarification, that's the best place that we'll engage with it. We'd love to help you out any way that we possibly can. Like you say, if you see us at the races, please stop, introduce yourself. We would greatly appreciate it. Thanks for supporting the show, and we'll see you next month. Take care.